to adopt the City of Vincent's annual budget. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. Have declared the meeting open at 6 p.m. And in terms of apologies and members on leave of absence, we do have all members attending this evening, although I'm not sure if Councillor Loden has joined us yet. He's attending via Zoom.
Through Meko, yes, I understand he will be joining us online, but momentarily.
Okay, thank you, CEO. So we'll go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. Welcome members of the public gallery. Great to see you all here this evening. I know that this budget has some big decisions ahead of us. It's probably something that's inciting a bit of passion and feeling in the community. So I do just ask that when you come forward, if you could please keep your comments respectful. Please note that this is a workplace. We do want to hear from you, but we value that in a calm and considered fashion. We do ask that you state your name, the suburb in which you reside, and we do allow you to speak up to 3 minutes in accordance with our meeting procedures local law. We do time you, and if I do let you know that you've reached your time, please return to your seat and respect that others then will come forward. So there's no set order, it's just whoever wishes to come forward first. And I open public question time.
Thank you. Anna Kelderman. I'm a ratepayer residing in Mount Hawthorn and a small business owner leasing office space in Leederville. I'll speak to item 4, fees and charges, and particularly the issue of paid parking. I may be a lone voice in the room at the moment because I'm fully supportive of paid parking introduction in consideration of the bigger picture. From a personal perspective, I support the city's proposal to introduce paid parking and would encourage ongoing consideration of increased rates of parking payable for longer term parking, in particular targeted at the all-day repeat working parker as a specific subset. They are here every time, they're a captured audience. We should be encouraging them to transition. The current scenario incentivises driving in the city, where local services can often be accessed via more sustainable forms of transport and where considerable numbers of non-Vincent visitors could choose alternative transport. As a ratepayer, I want the public car parks to do more heavy lifting in attaining funds. The land is not free, and if it is not earning money for the city which befits its land value, then we as ratepayers are subsidising the choice of others to drive, many of whom are not city ratepayers. Local, national and international research and evidence is also clear that higher rates of accessible and public transport in any given precinct increases average expenditure and dwell time, which is exactly what our businesses want. The alternative motion that I've just seen is short-sighted and contrary to researched evidence. Delaying the time to make the decision will not help the decision, it will just delay the decision made. We should be encouraging a transition, finding ways to support businesses, but not through flawed thinking. Paid parking is an obvious choice to help the transition to sustainable transport. As a business, I also note that subsidising a choice to drive is not an equitable distribution of costs amongst precinct owners or users. As a small business owner in Leederville, I am already paying for on-site parking at a significant cost per month via my lease. I also pay for commercial rates and charges which are passed on to me. For those that do not have on-site parking, their customer parking is subsidised, while my parking is a net cost. From a Leederville perspective, we have one of the most accessible locations in the entire metro area. We should be forging a path to reduce private transport, which requires us to remove incentives for this mode and increase incentives and advocacy of all other user hierarchies. A lunch or dinner on the strip in Leederville is all the poorer for the never-ending traffic noise and smell and lack of safety. The lack of safety won't change when we transition to e-vehicles. It will still be unsafe. We can only imagine a future without that for our centre if we reduce vehicle movement. The draft Leederville Precinct Structure Plan, the Leederville Place Plan, Leederville Connects Advocacy Program and the city's Accessible City Strategy all directly or indirectly demand reduced vehicle movement as a core strategy, making the centres safer, more attractive and better for business. Finally, in support of the many participants in the original Imagine Vincent process. The community specifically asked for a sustainable city, specifically sustainable transport. This almost irrelevant paid parking increase proposed is the least we can do to begin the journey. Without the incentive to change, we will never reach the goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Next speaker, please. No more speakers. I'm quite surprised. Hello, Andrew. Welcome.
Hello. Yep. My name's Andrew and I live in North Perth. I also have a...
Sorry, Andrew, we do require
Yep.
last name as well,
Okay,
if you wouldn't
I
mind.
apologise. My name is Andrew Paresis and I live in North Perth, and I also have a business in Leederville. And truth be told, paid parking will not affect our business, and especially during the day, because we're not open during the day because there is no one around. And why is there no one around? Because the retail in Leederville is dying. And if the retail continues to die in Leederville, we'll be left with a nighttime precinct only. And that's why I feel that we should be encouraging people to come to Leederville. And if that means giving them an hour free parking, we give them an hour free parking, because without retail, Leederville, like I said, will become just a nighttime precinct. And like I said earlier, for me, there is no benefit for us. People that come to our restaurant are staying for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, so they pay anyway. So give them an incentive of an hour free and increase the other parking by 50 cents an hour. But just give them some incentive to come to Leederville. Why do they go to Karrinyup, the parking? What is the City of Perth doing right now? Offering free parking to encourage the retail. We need to save the retail. The restaurants will be fine, but we need to save the retail. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor Cole and councillors and the executive. My name's Greg Johnson. I own Treadway Shoe Stores in Mount Hawthorn, and that business has been there for 70 plus years. I stand before you tonight with reference to 4.2, 4.3 and page 11 of the agenda item as my first concern. I stand before you as a very, very experienced retailer. I haven't been around for 5 minutes. I've been around for a long time. I've operated stores in retail shopping centres in the country, in the regional areas and in Perth. I'm very, very concerned about this proposal. It is a complete misunderstanding of the ecosystem as to how important parking is to the success of all retail, both daytime retail and nighttime retail. The introduction of the proposal to introduce a paid parking, in effect, a price rise by a half an hour reduction is in effect a price rise. It assumes an inelastic demand for parking. It's very simplistic. Parking is not inelastic, and the people that use Leederville, Mount Hawthorn and North Perth and the other part of the precincts here can go anywhere else. They don't have to come to Vincent. They're not forced to come here. There's plenty of alternatives in shopping centres that are free. I just request that you have a look at what's happened to the City of Perth. It's wrecked. The foot traffic is wrecked by a crazy system of parking. Subiaco's gone in the same direction. Why would you want to emulate a failed model? Both those cities are now trying to get pedestrians back on the street by offering free parking and other incentives. Here in Vincent, in the midst of all of this, we're going against that. We've decided, the powers that be decided, oh, we've got this great idea. We're going to impose something in the way of people coming here. We've been very successful. The report shows that 83% of the people come to Leederville, come to Mount Hawthorn, come to Vincent, come to North Perth, because there's an incentive to do so, and there's a disincentive everywhere else not to do so. It's called competitive advantage, and we have it, and you're going to give it away. It's just unbelievable. More so, it's unbelievable in these times. I don't know whether anybody's observed, but we're in tough times. Now's not the time to do it. That's the first thing. The second thing I want to ask the council, I want to ask this question. In Oxford Street, infrastructure has already been placed in the road to put cameras. Who approved it? Is the council aware of it? And where did the budget come for to do that in the future? Nobody's been made aware of it. I don't think it's been approved. And I'm very concerned about this being part of the culture in this administration and in this council that wants to impose uncompetitive things upon us, the retailers. Thanks very much for your attention. I hope you take what I'm saying very seriously. This is about judgment skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I believe you might be referring to car parking sensors, so I'll just refer to the CEO.
I'll sit down while, if I may, while you answer the question.
Yes, thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Through Mayor Cole, I think the question was not about cameras, but parking sensors in some of our time-limited bays, so our rangers can understand when somebody has exceeded the amount of time in a time-limited car bay. We call them parking sensors. They're not cameras per se, but it senses the movement of a vehicle.
Can I just ask, is that to replace the range?
What the sensors do is alert the rangers electronically when somebody has been parking in a car bay for longer than a time limit of either 15, 30 or 1 hour.
I understand what you're telling me, but is this to ultimately...
Greg,
replace the
perhaps rather than having a two-way conversation, we might discuss this more fully when we come to this item, but I believe there's been
Just
some new additions to the Leederville car park. I think that's the issue.
yeah, and just to answer that question, the parking sensors can't provide an infringement on a vehicle. The parking sensors alert the rangers so they can more efficiently understand when somebody has exceeded their time limit. So the parking rangers still need to provide an infringement if somebody has exceeded a 15, 30 minute or 1 hour bay.
Next speaker, please.
Okay, good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and others. My name's Daniel Habib. I'm a resident of Mount Hawthorn. I'd like to discuss item 5.1, underground power. If I can start by saying I believe underground power is a good thing. There's good rationale for it, and I believe that it's the right direction to be going in. However, I believe the City of Vincent's approach to funding the underground power scheme is neither equitable nor appropriate. It's also a step out with other comparable local governments. The city proposes a blanket 2.1 rate increase for every ratepayer to create a fund to pay for the underground power, which only some will benefit from. Some people who live in the City of Vincent have already paid for underground power. Many others will not get underground power in the short or middle term, and some may never receive underground power due to the location of their homes and where the current infrastructure is in its life cycle. So requiring every resident to fund underground power is not fair nor equitable, and it doesn't really relate and correlate to those that will actually receive the benefit. There's a strong precedent from other local governments for your user-paid approach. The City of Stirling, Town of Cambridge, City of Melville, to name just a few, only charge ratepayers in the areas where underground power projects are actually going ahead. And only those ratepayers will actually benefit. Further, those who have already invested in part of underground power in their homes, if they've paid for their home to the pole underground power in previous projects, so then pay less for their portion of underground power. So I realise that there's a considerable upfront cost in relation to underground power, but they shouldn't be footed by all ratepayers in the City of Vincent in the way that the administration has currently proposed. I think if the City of Vincent had managed its finances in a way that it put in a position to fund the upfront costs, it could then recoup its costs from the residents who benefit over time, as other councils have actually demonstrated successfully. This would require it to pay down its hefty debt so that the project could be funded from debt financing, again, in ways that other cities have done. So I urge the council to not adopt the citywide charge for underground power in its current form and instead develop a user pay system in line with other local governments. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Look, we have just recently had a significant update from Western Power that we've also become eligible for a further 5 underground power projects covering parts of Perth, Highgate, Mount Hawthorn, North Perth, Leederville and West Perth. We haven't received the maps from Western Power yet, but we understand that that will cover most, if not all, of the City of Vincent that has not yet been covered by underground power. So we had hoped that we would have more detail this evening, but we have had confirmation that we're no longer looking at 3 project areas, but 8 project areas substantially across the City of Vincent. No, because we have 3 confirmed, and when we come to this item, we can talk about that 2.1% in more detail and answer any questions. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer, Highgate. I don't support this budget, and I think it's a window into Vincent's financial management. Firstly, I think the treatment of businesses is appalling. Last year, the city stopped collecting commercial waste, saving $921,000. Rather than pass this saving on through reduced rates, which is the logical and fair thing to do, they provided a one-off rebate. If the ongoing savings, that's $900,000 each year, had been reflected in a reduced rate in the dollar, it would mean that this year's rate in the dollar is 20.9% higher than last year. Businesses are effectively paying 20.9% more than they did last year, and they still have to pay for waste collection. Secondly, to have the director include in her presentation that, and I'm quoting, lower commercial rate is designed to support local businesses is misleading. The lower commercial rate in the dollar reflects the previous minister's directive that rates should stay the same at the same time that the Valuer General reviewed GRVs. The review showed that residential GRVs were significantly reduced while commercial GRVs stayed the same. In order to meet the no change requirement, the residential rate in the dollar had to increase. Commercial and residential essentially paid the same as they did before, just the way of calculating it changed. So for the city to say it was designed to support local businesses, I think is misleading. Then there's the 2.1% increase for underground power, and it's essentially to provide bridging finances to residents who choose to pay off underground power over time. It's inequitable. The whole community pays, yet a small number benefits. People who have already paid to put power underground, including those in the Highgate East area, will have to pay. People outside the 3 areas or the 8 areas will have to pay, even though they're unlikely to get power for a number of years. Businesses have to pay, even though the scheme is in residential areas. You should have chosen to go down the Subiaco model, but you didn't. So you should adopt a user pays model funded by short-term loans or from municipal funds with full cost recovery, just like the current rate instalment system. Vincent can borrow more money. You've reduced the pay down this year by 1.5 million or 1.6 or 1.1. The figures seem to change. And there are currently $12.7 million in unrestricted funds in the bank. And this is at the low point of your revenue cycle. Once again, the capital budget is unrealistically too high. Last year, you said you'd spend $22 million, 10 of which came directly from ratepayers. You ended up spending 8.8 million of that 22 million. And this year you want to spend 20.4 million. You promise, but you fail to deliver, yet you take our money to do it. To me, it looks like a lot of padding to compensate for poor financial management and poor project management. Rates would be a lot less, at least in the short term, if you could get a handle on your capital work projects. There are other points in the information provided to the community. The point like, in order to justify the pay increase, you said that employees had a pay freeze for 1 year.
You have reached your 3 minutes. If you could please conclude your statement.
Yep, thank you. For 1 year, without mentioning that they actually were compensated with time off that year, or the fact that they received a 1.5 pay rise last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudley. Just to clarify that there are some commercial areas being covered by underground power. In one of the project areas, we do have coverage of Scarborough Beach Road and Oxford Street in the Mount Hawthorn Town Centre, and we'll be exploring further commercial underground power in the new project areas. Next speaker, please.
Ray Stevenson from North Perth, Emerson Street, North Perth. I'd just like to thank the councillors who previously, at previous meeting, put through $50,000 for the Beatty Park Reserve drainage. And I really think there's enough emotion in everything gone into this. So I asked for that $50,000 if the council could, the admin and that could this time cooperate with the residents. So we are kept informed because it is an issue, and it is an issue that plays on our minds all the time. But just to go back, I'm not going to, enough has been said, you all know what's happened. But it really started in 2013. In 2017-18, there was $150,000 on the budget. That financial year went through. We didn't hear anything. 3 months into the next financial year, I started making inquiries and was told that the budget had gone. So I just hope that this $50,000 does not go down that track. And really in this day, with rising building costs, probably $50,000 will not be enough, I'm not sure. But all we're asking for is exactly what was proposed and voted on and put through. We know that we can never come up, or I know that we can never come up with a solution that's going to be foolproof, but we can have that wall to slow down the flood water, let the drainage, when it starts flowing again, to take the water away. Yes, some of the water will bank up on Beatty Park Reserve, but if it's that bad and it's that raining, I don't think anyone will be out there throwing frisbees. And it does drain really quite remarkably after the rains. So that's really all I can say is just, I think just this time involve us and let us know what's going on, and I think everything will be fine. But we had good reason to keep this up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and executive. My name is Beck Johnson. I'm a resident of Mount Hawthorn. In this budget, ratepayers, residents and businesses are being asked to shoulder the majority of the city's budget burden through significant rate rises and increases to fees and charges. This budget proposes a 7.6% rate increase and an increase in key fees, including parking fees in Leederville. In an environment where cost of living is increasing, these are significant increases that will hurt both ratepayers and residents, particularly our most vulnerable, and businesses that are already hurting. While some increases to rates are to be expected, what is proposed is too much, and without any corresponding action to curb the city's spending, this is neither a fair nor a balanced approach. Costs have gone up everywhere. Now, more than ever, is the time for prudent and accurate budgeting and for laser focus on operational efficiency. It is also the time to work really hard to strike a balance between cost cutting and rate rises that is fair. In relation to prudent and accurate budgeting, for example, I note that the city repeatedly over budgets its capital expenditure. Its average CapEx budget for the past 5 years is $15.6 million, yet its average expenditure only 8.6. This says two things to me: that the work that is being promised to residents is not being done, and that the city needs to revisit its CapEx budget figures and adjust them to be far more realistic. I believe that you would easily find some of the funding that you're looking for if your budgeting in this area was reflective of what is actually able to be spent. In relation to operational efficiency, the city appears not to have reduced its headcount by a single FTE in this budget. In fact, workforce spend has gone up by 25%. That's $7 million in just 5 years. This may correspond with an increase in the discretionary projects and activities that the city undertakes, or with an organisation that is simply not working efficiently. No matter what the reason, an urgent review of operational efficiency in the City of Vincent is needed. In relation to another area where operational expenditure has ballooned this year, materials and contracts, excluding last year, which involved a large one-off payment, the city's materials and contracts expenditure has hovered between $14 and $17 million since 2017. This year, this budget line has jumped to nearly $22 million. That's another $5 million in spend. Costs are going up, but I believe that this presents an even more compelling reason for serious scrutiny in relation to outgoings. This means trimming back discretionary projects, marketing, and the high fees the city pays to all of its consultants. It means changing the way this administration has always worked and doing things differently. Councillors, I doubt that any of you live in the way you are running this city. In an environment of uncertainty and rising costs, I believe you personally would reduce your outgoings on all but essentials, pay down your debt, budget as accurately as you could, and run your households more efficiently. I urge you to treat our money as you would your own, and I ask you, be fair. Please, don't sleepwalk into yet another year of poor financial management. Make the tough decisions tonight to ensure a sustainable future for the City of Vincent. Reject this budget as it stands, consider a reduced rate rise, instruct your CEO to budget accurately and to trim his costs, and if he asks you where, start with the discretionary projects and hold out until he does these things. We are relying on you to have the guts to bring real, positive and necessary change to your administration.
Thanks, Beck. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and administration. My name's Fern Gardam. I live in Hutt Street, Mount Lawley. My question relates to miscellaneous, part of item 5.1, attachment 2, and appears on page 56 of the overall papers for tonight, and reads, miscellaneous artlets, and I repeat, artlets, public art, sculpture, new, $40,000. I understand public art generally in the City of Vincent context. My question is, what is an artlet?
Does anyone wish to address that now, Director?
Yes, through Nicole. There's a number of locations in the City of Vincent where in the Verge, areas have been used for to try and improve the amenity of that area. Public art has been provided in the road reserve. So essentially, it's been named an artlet to try and market it so that people understand what it is, but it's essentially public art that's in the road reserve.
I guess the similarity for people who are familiar with parklets being in the road reserve and that this is public art in the road reserve. Yep, okay. Any further speakers this evening? Thank you.
Good evening, Wayne Crofts. I'm the CEO of the Good Grocer IGA in Leederville, just down the road, and I live in Wembley Downs. We're just here to speak about item 4 tonight, the budget, in particular the suggestion for paid parking. This year, our store, the Good Grocer in Leederville, is down on customer numbers significantly. It's underperforming its peers that we have in other similar suburbs around Perth, and the reduction, which is largely attributable to the reduction in customer count. And so any barrier to admission to attend a supermarket where any mission under an hour, where it's a quick in and out or a quick shop, will absolutely impact the customer's mindset to whether or not they will attend that store. And so a barrier of having all parking bays paid for, having to pay for those bays would absolutely be a barrier, and we would be significantly concerned with that. And so we would request the council take a balanced approach between charging for bays and absolutely supportive of trying to balance budgets and drive revenue, but also having that balanced approach of respecting the different missions that customers will be coming to Leederville for, whether that be a 15-minute quick shop, a 30-minute basket shop, whether it be in an hour for a coffee or something. But during the day, where the majority of our transactions occur between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m, that's the time where we would like you to consider very much a balanced approach to how you structure your payment for parking. We have no other stores that are 100% paid for parking in Perth. And speaking to the network manager of IGA based in Perth, that is based on their research, a significant impediment to driving customers to that shopping precinct if there's no actual option for a free park for a period of time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Are there any further speakers this evening? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate you being here this evening and for providing us with your feedback. Just also noting that we have received 5 statements with questions in writing from Fiona Rose of Mount Hawthorn, Bill Farrell of Perth, Daniel Tartlin of Mount Hawthorn, Ross Bunkle of Mount Hawthorn, Sean Offer of Mount Lawley, and that has been circulated to councillors. So if there are questions there that councillors would like to pick up on behalf of those residents and ratepayers, we can do so as we go through the budget. Okay. CEO, declarations of interest.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We had 4 declarations of interest from councillors in relation to this item, which were proximity interests relating to the Vincent Underground Power Project, similar to the declarations which were made when council considered the signing of the MOU with Western Power for the 3 current project areas. And those declarations were from Councillor Wallace, Councillor Alexander, Councillor Hallett and Councillor Warner. And in light of those proximity interests, we, similar to the last meeting, we sought permission from the Minister through the Department of Local Government for those councillors to participate in the debate. And we did receive permission in writing from the Minister's delegate for participation in this meeting only on that item. We might make that letter part of the minutes, Manager. And then there are 4 impartiality interests in relation to the rates waiver for Florida Athena Football Club. They were from Councillor Castle, noting impartiality interest, noting that the president of the Florida Athena Soccer Club supported her during her election campaign. Councillor Castle purchased a ticket to the Florida Athena versus Adelaide United match and received an additional minor amount of hospitality below the declaration threshold. Mayor Cole declared an impartiality interest, noting that her son is a junior player of the Florida Athena Soccer Club, and she is also a social member of the North Perth Bowling Club. Both clubs are being recommended for rates waivers. Councillor Loden declared an impartiality interest, noting that he plays indoor soccer with people who are members of the Florida Athena Club and executive, and his daughter plays for the club. And I also declared a similar impartiality interest, noting that my niece is a junior member of the Florida Athena Soccer Club. They are all the declarations of interest received, Mayor Cole.
Thank you very much, CEO. Before we move the motion, I just wanted to check whether there's a presentation from administration this evening. Should we go to that first, please, then, Director?
Yes, through Mayor Cole. The presentation we wanted to highlight mainly related to the outcomes of consultation and the proposed changes between what was presented to council for advertising of the differential rates and the consultation feedback, and then other changes that have been put forward in the budget papers for tonight. And the Director will share the screen so viewers on the live stream can see that as well. And it's just popping up now.
Okay, so through you, Mayor Cole, I'll provide a very brief overview of some of the changes that have occurred since we last discussed the budget with the community about a month ago. Just give me a moment, sorry. So I think just to recap, we discussed some budget themes for this year, very much a focus on long-term sustainability continues to be a focus of ours. The budget is responding to changes and challenges that the city faced as a result of losing revenue during the COVID period. And as we've all discussed, there are upward inflationary pressures impacting on cost of projects, materials, wages and insurance. Underground power is a key project that is being discussed in this budget, excuse me. And there is a focus on service delivery and efficiency, as members of the community have mentioned, is required. The Capital Works program continues to focus on asset renewal and the completion of a number of large federal government funded projects. A month ago, we proposed to reduce free parking from 1 hour to 30 minutes in city-owned car parks in lieu of a 2.8% rate increase. That proposal has since been amended, and the CEO will discuss that in a moment. The amendment, or the proposal being a first hour of parking being $1 in city car parks, and then a corresponding 20-cent increase to other paid parking areas. Oh, sorry, and including the car parks as well. And then, as we've mentioned, a proposed 7.6% rate increase, including 2.1% towards building a reserve that will support underground power. Just want to talk very quickly. We had an incredible response from the community to our consultation process, which we appreciated. We had about 964 people visit our site. Over 50 people downloaded documents and 336 contributed to at least one or two surveys that we presented. And in addition to that, in sort of a similar period of time between 9th of March and 22nd of May, we have also been going through a parallel community consultation process to get feedback from the community on our strategic planning and how we're progressing. And we had over 1,400 people visit that site, over 60 people download a document, and 313 contribute to at least one of 3 surveys. We've taken that information into the budget process. The community consultation feedback on our strategic planning process, on a rating of 1 to 5, or if you say 1 and 2 are very high and high, we did pretty well in terms of getting feedback from the community around how we're achieving against our strategic planning themes. You can see there, I've just sort of averaged them by category. But you can see there, it was ranging between 69% and 83% support at the very high or high range from the community. With regards to the specific consultation that we conducted for the budget, one of the questions that we asked was, do you support a 7.6% rate increase? And you can see there on the coloured bar that obviously the majority there would say definitely disagree or somewhat disagree. And a smaller number of about 28 people out of, I think, actually I don't know the exact number of that one, I haven't got it in front of me. Another 28 people saying somewhat support or definitely support. But you can see down the right-hand side there also, there was 86 people who provided responses in the text, and there were comments that we would expect to see, including some that we've heard in the community tonight. Some saying we support a rate increase, but not at the suggested level. Some saying we feel the rate increase is definitely far too high. there was about 7 people or 10% who referred to the high cost of living that households are experiencing right now. And there was a strong response, about 48, who specifically talked about the underground power proposal. 26 of those commented that they would prefer to see those who specifically benefit being levied as opposed to across the board levy. 6 people out of the 86 were concerned about the rates levy being applied because they already had underground power. I'm providing obviously a very quick and snappy overview, and obviously when you do a summary like this, you slice things out. So I just want to also mention that there is a much more detailed breakdown of the feedback. There's about a 16-page report that I've prepared that's in the agenda paper, but also I left all of the commentary from the community as it was provided to us. So you can see the data raw in its given way. So even though I'm providing a summary, all of that information is there for you as it was provided.
I might just comment on the underground power feedback there. That came up as well as a written question, Mayor Cole, through the written submissions tonight. And we have got a lot of feedback about that. So there's a overwhelming positive sentiment and feedback. The fact that the city is continuing with undergrounding power after a long break, and we haven't been able to participate in previous rounds of the state underground power program. But there were some questions and concerns about the 2.1% rates increase related to underground power. And we will be clarifying this as we start our community consultation engagement on the 3 project areas which have been approved. And as you mentioned, Mayor Cole, we now do have a written invitation from Western Power to consider a second MOU for 5 new project areas, which would cover a broad sweep of the rest of the city of Vincent, which will confirm that we are we have a whole of City of Vincent approach to underground power. So our aim and objective over the next 5 to 6 years will be to complete underground power throughout the City of Vincent. There will absolutely be a user pays approach to that, which means the property owner will need to pay the service charge and the network charge for the cost or the local government portion of the costs for the underground power project, and Western Power will cover the vast majority of that capital cost. The funding which we are suggesting and proposing as part of the rates will essentially provide, I'd call it a cash flow fund, because there will be a delay between the cash calls from Western Power as part of our co-funding agreement, which we'll sign next year. And then there'll be a delay between making the first number of payments to Western Power for that project, and then our ability to recoup from the property owners through a service charge and rates. So we haven't finalised our financial model because Western Power is only just beginning its detailed design for that project, and it is a large-scale project. We've only got high-level cost estimates at the moment, and we won't actually know what the actual figures are to confirm our financial model and the cash flow model that we'll require until we have the outcome of the detailed design process from Western Power, and then we've signed a co-funding agreement with specific payments required. Then we'll know exactly what the peak payments will be in the cash flow, and then what the timing will be to recoup the contributions from the property owner through service charges. We will also need to be making assumptions about how many property owners will be willing to pay that service charge up front, and then how many property owners will be seeking delayed or deferred payments over 2 or maybe 3 years. So the city will need to bridge the gap in cash flow for that. What we're proposing to council is that this is essentially self-funded throughout the city with this initial 2.1% from rates going into that cash flow reserve. We'll nearly certainly need to add to that reserve in the following financial year. But when we do that, the following financial year, we'll have the benefit of the detailed financial analysis from Western Power. We certainly didn't want the shock value of having to try to do this all at once in a rush next year, when suddenly we'll be under a 3-month time frame between signing a co-funding agreement. So this initial amount of money is essentially to make sure we're ready to complete what will be a transformational project and program for the city over the next 4 to 5 years, if council approves this second MOU for 5 new project areas. There's been some concerns raised around equity. If we're successful in completing underground power throughout the city of Vincent, we will be able to make large scale cost savings on things like tree pruning, which if we complete this program as we aim to, we'll be able to save up to $400,000 a year in tree pruning costs. We'll also be able to significantly reduce the amount of money we pay on electricity for street lighting, because there'll be a wholesale conversion to LEDs, which are much more efficient. We'll be able to massively accelerate our sustainability agenda through our expansion of our urban tree canopy, which will have a cooling effect, as well as a widespread environmental benefit throughout the city by greening and cooling all the streets in our suburbs through this project. So I do understand some residents have already received underground power specifically for their street, but this is a whole of city, whole of suburb transformational project, which will have benefits for generations to come, including through the reason why Western Power is doing this is to have better and more secure infrastructure and not to see things like the blackouts that we saw in North Perth and Mount Hawthorn 3 weekends ago when a foil balloon went up into the air. So there's a benefit throughout the city from a more secure power supply. I'll hand back to the director because yes, through you, Mayor Cole, there's a question from some residents who've already installed a green dome. There are essentially 2 aspects to what will be the service charge. You need to have the green dome connected to the house, but then there's also a network services charge. So Western Power will bear the cost for their infrastructure, but then there's a network charge, which is part of the local government component. So we'll only be seeking to recoup the costs from property owners, and this will be a detailed process, which will be property by property to understand who needs to pay and when, but you won't be charged twice to install another green dome if you already have that power connection, but there may be a network service charge. We don't know exactly what that would be, and that will be part of council's consideration of the detailed financial model and assessment once we move towards that co-funding agreement with Western Power. I'll hand back to the director.
Yes, thank you. Just give me a moment. So just to round out the conversation around feedback for the rates increases, there was an open question in the survey that said to, or asked for feedback, if we weren't to do a large rates increase, what would be some of the things that you would suggest that we could cut, or what would be your priorities? Obviously, when we're on doing strategic planning processes, we hear about the good things and what people would like us to do. This was a nice kind of counterbalance to that of, well, if we were to turn things off, what would you suggest we turn off? So it was kind of a nice balance. I've attempted to sort of put this into some categories. It's in the document and you can draw your own conclusions, but I definitely saw some strong themes there. Out of the 86 respondents, 20 of those explicitly, challenged the city to cut back on discretionary spending, get back to basics. So that was a very strong theme that came through. And there were 9 comments there that were along the lines of be considerate of building works, construction works at this point in time. There are heightened expenses. So if there are things that you can defer, perhaps consider doing that. There was definitely probably about 7 comments there that were around cost of employees, everything from wages to number of headcount, is administration being as efficient as it can be, both in terms of our employment costs, but then there were also comments just about look at your own efficiencies and make sure that you're running your business well. And then there was a variety of different projects and priorities that were suggested. And I won't go through those in detail, but they are itemised there for you to have a look at. There was a second survey that talked about car parking. I won't spend too much time on this, but it was really clear in the proposal of transitioning from a 1 hour free parking to 30 minutes free parking. There was a really overwhelming strong response to disagree to that. 85% of respondents didn't support that proposal. And there was some really fantastic feedback once again as to justifications around that. A lot of commentary that was along the lines of, it's not enough time for people who live in and around or work in and around the area to run their errands, to have a meal, to do their shopping, to attend their appointments. There was about a dozen people who specifically said, if you have a mobility issue, it makes it more difficult as well. You need a bit more time. There was about 60 odd comments that drilled down on the impact on local businesses. And there were various comments there. And I think we had some comments in the community tonight about being concerned that patrons would revert to other shopping jurisdictions that might have free parking. There was quite a few comments actually. I actually created it as a theme going, let's not be Subiaco. So you'll actually see that in the comments, don't be Subiaco. And just a real concern that it would act as a detractor for local residents to shop local. There was about 20 of the 177 respondents who encouraged the city to think of other ways to generate revenue or to cut expenditure. So that came through strongly in that survey. And there were also some really good other suggestions that I'll pass through to the parking team of things that we could do differently. So there was even streets where people were saying, hey, there are people who park here, let's focus on this street, or let's do more enforcement in this area. So there was definitely some great suggestions in there as well. So that's a bit of the community feedback. And just to kind of round out the budget before I hand it back to yourself, Mayor Cole, I did want to make a few what I believe are some important contextual comments around the budget. And just to add a little bit of context, my background, last 20 years or so, I've worked in billion-dollar companies, and a big part of my experience has been large-scale restructuring of organisations and actually going in and rebuilding them from the inside out and looking for efficiencies and doing that kind of work. So that's an area that I play in naturally, and I suppose I come at it fairly dispassionately, if you like. I'm sort of fairly scientific about these things. So when I look at the City of Vincent, I look at evidence for how we're doing or not doing. I look at comparative benchmarks. I look at sort of national sort of comparators as to how this organisation is performing compared to its sector, and I suppose try and break that down a little bit. My observations, I know there'll be people who disagree with this, but is that we do sit as a low rating council in the local government metro area, and it appears to me that ratepayers have been benefiting from a lower rating environment, but there are consequences to that, which is that we are generating less revenue compared to other organisations that are doing similar work. And for those who are interested, what I believe is a very realistic benchmark is the town of Victoria Park, the gross rental value for that town is almost identical to ours. The population is almost identical to ours, but they generate about $9 million a year more than we do from their rates base to do similar work. So that's just a comparator to give a bit of an idea of the fact that for City of Vincent ratepayers, they are getting really good value for money. From an administration perspective, we are cutting it really fine in terms of having funds to do some necessary work. So the evidence seems to me that we are underspending on asset sustainability and renewal, and we have underspent on information technology. And there are adverse audit findings that are actually, I suppose, supporting those testaments. I know that employment costs is always a focus. Some recent work that we did indicated that 77% of our positions are paid less than a comparative role in other local governments by between $1,000 and $20,000 a year. So it's not insignificant. So we actually have, my perception from an administration perspective is that we have actually been squeezing down the expense side. And that's not to say that there's not discretionary spending that couldn't be cut or that there are other areas where we could be more efficient. I'm not saying that, but if you look at the macro level, we are spread fairly thin. Another data point that I would also point out is that we have very low levels of savings or reserves. And that's one of the reasons why borrowings is high, because we don't actually have a lot of money in our bank account. So when a one-off requirement comes where we need a bit of money, we actually have to go and borrow the money rather than be able to draw on a savings account. And if I can just sort of back that up, this is a picture, different councils, how much money they have in reserve. So Vic Park has $53 million in reserve. City of Vincent has $11.4 million in reserve. Now, our reserves of $11.4 million, some of that is actually restricted for particular purpose. So even though it's 11.4 million, we can't use all of that for some of the purposes that we're talking about. Cambridge has 39 million, South Perth has 41 million, Subiaco has 57. So for a council of our size, we probably should have 4 or 5 times that amount in reserve available as part of our risk management strategy, as available cash to be able to help cash flow things like underground power, to be able to, we had an example last year where we wanted to pay out of a long-term contract. It was a financially beneficial business case for us. It was better for us to exit the contract than to stay in the contract over the life of that contract. But we didn't have the cash to actually buy ourselves out of that contract. We had to borrow the money to do it. So I would just sort of say to you, these are examples for me of where we could be building our financial sustainability. And while we look at 7.6% rate increase as harsh, it's actually part of a broader picture of the fact that we probably need to be having an adjustment. And just to finish off that statement, you may not be able to see this table very clearly, but I've had some comments, some conversations with ratepayers about the rates impact. What I've done on the left-hand side is I've sort of showed the gross rental value, which is used to calculate rates for our entire residential population, and where it sits. So you can see down the side the percentiles. So the 50th percentile has a gross rental value of 17,160. So that means that 50% of our residential properties have a gross rental value of that number or less. And then if you map that across, a 7.6% increase for that group would be $103 or $104 a year or $2 a week. So that's the one that we've been using in our marketing material as the halfway mark. But even if we go up to the 85th percentile, so 85% of all residential properties, at that level, a ratepayer is paying $154.41 or $2.97 a week. And then at the 95th percentile, it's $189 annually or $3.64 a week. So even if we go up to that 95th percentile, 95% of ratepayers are going to be less than that benchmark. So that's sort of what the impact analysis looks like. You can see there's a really small number who are up at a much higher level. Our distribution is sort of, it's front-ended. So we have a lot of people up the low end, and then we have it sort of tails out and has a really small number at the really high end. But 95% sit at that benchmark there. So that, Mayor Cole, I'll probably round out the conversation at that point and perhaps open it up for conversational questions.
Thank you very much, Director. The CEO just wants to address the car parking, and then I will see if council members would like to ask questions before we move the motion.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Just to speak a little bit to the key change on the fees and charge, which has been raised, was we did go out for public consultation on the proposal to move from the 1 hour free policy to a 30-minute free policy. And the survey results showed that was overwhelmingly negative. And what we have recommended to council tonight is a nominal charge of $1 for that first hour of parking. And then it would go to above $3 for the second hour as part of the fees and charges. Anyone who's involved in local government, as council is, knows that car parking of whatever nature is usually our most contentious issue. It is something which all local governments have to manage. City of Vincent needs to manage it in a much more sophisticated way because we are in a city. We're so close to the CBD. Anyone who lives north of the CBD who wants to get into the city of Perth for work, which is where the vast number of jobs are, has to come through here. And a lot of commuters do like to come park in the city of Vincent and then take public transport in, so they don't have to pay the large rates that you do in the CBD. It is a very tricky thing to get right, and it's a constant juggle. Our proposal to introduce a nominal price signal on that first hour free just in the city car parks is what we consider a step in the right direction. We only have a limited number or a limited supply of car parking. Over time, the number of cars and the population will increase, including from people from outside of the city of Vincent travelling through here or visiting. At some point, we're going to need to be able to better manage and balance the ever-increasing demand with what is now a fixed supply of car bays. By far the most efficient way to do that is through a price signal. And what we're suggesting is a nominal charge only, which we do not think will act as a disincentive for people to come visit, shop, go out and meet friends and go to the movies here. Wayne from the IGA did mention how some businesses rely on those time-limited parking, where this proposal is not to charge for those 15-minute and 30-minute time-limited bays. We want a number of high rotation bays. We would look to review those numbers of 15-minute bays and 30-minute bays. And the suggestion that we made, both with the 30-minute free proposal as well as this proposal of $1 only for the first hour, is that we would also introduce something new to the City of Vincent, which is 1 hour time-limited free bays for seniors and parents with prams. And we would put those into all our car parks based on a ratio of the number of ACROD bays. So seniors and parents with prams could still park for 1 hour for free, which would be time limited, probably in the areas which are closest and most adjacent to those businesses. The introducing a small price signal is particularly important as we get closer to what is peak occupancy for our car parks. That is, we are on the cusp of that at Leederville, where both our car parks now do fill up at certain times of the day, and often those car parks are filling up. Frame Court fills up very early in the morning with staff car parking. We do want people to work, obviously, and be able to park if they don't have any other option. But we have seen businesses like ABN who have moved from an entirely car-based workforce out of Osborne Park. They moved their entire headquarters and other offices into the heart of Leederville and provided a very small number of staff car parking bays only, and they completely transformed their workforce, who are now arriving via the train, via the bus, cycling, walking, and through e-scooters. That is exactly the sort of behaviour change and the change that council is advocating in terms of a mode shift, which is documented in the accessible city strategy. That can happen, that needs to happen because our car parks are filling up, and they're filling up fastest in Leederville, less so in our other car parks. So introducing a modest price signal will help with some turnover to make sure that there's a better reflection of the value of that car bay. The value of that car bay has increased over time, which means the cost, the subsidy we're currently providing users of the car bays is increasing over time. We're just suggesting a small reduction in that subsidy that ratepayers are currently paying for those car bays. We do note that we're in constant competition, always have been, with big box shopping centres. Our best bet as a city is our unique town centre offerings. We're not door-to-door franchises of fast food and other national and international chains. What the City of Vincent can offer in all our unique town centres is something different, and something very different to the franchises and chains that you find in big box shopping centres. The parking is not free at those big box shopping centres. Somebody pays. The people who pay for that car parking are the leaseholders, who pay large amounts of rent to the owners of those national big box shopping centres. The proposal for $1 free, $1 only in the first hour for our car bays is just to reduce the amount of the subsidy that we're currently providing as the value of that land increases over time. And we think that this is a modest step in the right direction to meet a number of our objectives, and it does form an important part of the city's financial stability going forward.
Thank you, CEO. I'll open it for questions. Council members, Councillor Arpaio.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Good evening, everyone. I just want to also acknowledge the good turnout in public gallery. Just a quick question, which I only thought about it when Daniel from the public gallery was talking. I'm not au fait with the Local Government Act or the regulations that govern how we can charge, how we do our fees and charges. My question is that in a lot of the communications about underground power, of which I'm an absolute supporter, and I don't think anyone is not a supporter of it, a lot of the marketing is basically saying that the 7.6% rate charge includes a 2.1% rate. And I just wanted to confirm with administration that we've looked into whether it's permissible for us to charge a 2.1% levy to everybody when we know that some people won't get underground power connected to their meter.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think that question goes to the issue of equity about what the City of Vincent funds in terms of our projects, programs and services. I had a similar question from a resident and ratepayer a few weeks ago who was asked about the large amount of money we pay to run, maintain and manage Beatty Park each year. The resident ratepayer didn't swim, didn't use Beatty Park, and was asking why the City of Vincent needed to spend so much money, ratepayers' money, for one facility which that resident or ratepayer never enters. Nearly all of our projects and programs are location or geographic specific. So our capital works program needs to cover all our suburbs and all our areas. But at any point in time, we are nearly certainly going to be investing slightly more in one park or one reserve or one playground or one street or one road across the city. What we're trying to endeavouring to do across the corporate business plan and the capital works program is making sure that we have an equitable spread of resourcing and provision of capital works and services across the entire city. So it's equitable across the entire program. Underground power, in my opinion, is probably the most geographically spread and diverse and beneficial single project that the city could or has undertaken previously and could undertake in the future. The whole of city, whole of suburb, whole of street benefits are much broader and much wider in terms of the transformational impact it would have on the issues I mentioned previously: sustainability, energy supply security, improving our biodiversity, beautification of our streets, and it results in whole of city, whole of organizational cost savings around reduction of unnecessary tree pruning and electricity costs, for instance. So while there is a direct benefit to the property owner, there's also a street, suburb and whole of Vincent benefit. And I think those benefits are more broadly based and beneficial for the entire community than nearly any other single one of our capital works programs or projects, for instance, which are more location specific than the broader impact and benefit of underground power.
Just one follow-up clarification. So yeah, I totally get that everything we spend is to the community, and some people might not benefit from Beatty Park if they never go there. I guess just raise a sharp question is that we are actually saying that 2.1% of municipal rates is to get underground power, and if the areas that have already got it, I just want to confirm that based on the regulations that it's permissible. It's not a loaded question. I just want to make sure that the way that we're communicating it and saying that this is to get underground power, and someone who's in an area that's already done, I just want to make sure that we're not breaching any regulation.
Through Mayor Cole, I do understand the councillor's question now. So maybe we haven't been clear enough, and clearly because of the feedback, we haven't been clear enough that 2.1% is essentially to ensure that the city, as a financial entity, is in a financial position to make cash payments to Western Power to enable us to do this underground power across the board. What we'll be proposing to council for the financial model is a service charge which will be attached to rates, which will be direct and specific to that property, and that will be the delay in recouping that cost. That will be a service charge under the Act, and that's what the property owner's paying. So I do agree that we probably haven't communicated that well enough, and then we've created some confusion about the cash flow reserve that we're creating, which will create over the long term, and then the service charge, which will be attached to the specific properties that are receiving underground power when the rates notices go out next year.
I'll just take that as a yes. I think that's.
CEO, the question is, are we breaching any local government regulation?
Through Mayor Cole, the answer to that is no. The answer is that the service charge will be reflected in the rates notices going to the specific properties next financial year. The 2.1% is not a service charge. We've been quite clear that as a general rates levy, that's money coming to the city. We'll hold it into one of our reserves, like all our other reserves.
Oh, I was just trying to get your answer for you. Questions, councillors? Yes, hello, welcome, Councillor Loden. I've seen you pop up. Good to see you here. The CEO would just like to make sure we're receiving audio. Can you hear us? It looks like you can.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Councillor,
Sorry, I was late.
Are you're fine. Did you have a question?
Just in terms of a question in relation to the progress of the CBP or TFP and Capital Works program and when that may be coming forward.
Through Mayor Cole, good question. I think the Mayor asked me that today. We've been flat out getting to tonight. We now have what we're putting forward to council is essentially what become year one of an updated corporate business plan, four-year capital works program and the LTFP. I'm looking to the finance manager and the director here. We're not going to be able to bring that to the July council meeting, but we're aiming for August. Got 2 nods. So you'll see them in August, and we'll try to provide those drafts to council in advance of that August meeting following tonight's meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Sorry to go back to the 2.1 because I didn't get a part of it. So someone that's already got underground power and they pay 2.1% on their rates, how do they benefit?
Through Mayor Cole, for instance, the residents of Highgate East they'll benefit from the City of Vincent meeting a large number of its sustainability objectives, organisation-wide cost savings from being able to reduce the City of Vincent's tree pruning costs, which are whole of city tree pruning costs.
I've heard that explanation, but the ones that get underground power and pay the 2.1% will get all that as well. So the residents that pay 2.1 and don't have underground power are only not going to get 2.1% value. It certainly doesn't sound like it. It's a nice sales pitch, but.
We're taking questions at the moment, Councillor Alexander. Do you have any further questions?
Yes, could you explain how they get real value out of the 2.1? Because there is a lot of complaints, and we've seen by the consultation that there's a lot of people can't see it. So I'd like to hear the explanation about how they get actual value.
Underground power is so expensive, you can only do one project at a time. And there's been a long delay since our last project. We are now ramping up to do, hopefully, an ongoing program to complete underground power throughout the City of Vincent. So the residents who we did underground power for in Highgate East, for instance, they would have had an immediate large increase in their property values. So they have been able to benefit hugely from the city's ability to underground power in Highgate East. So they have benefited, and they've benefited for 10 years longer than the residents who haven't been able to get underground power. So again, it's going back to the point Councillor Opolo made, it's an equity issue that we can't deliver all these projects all at once, all in the one location. They need to be staged and staggered on an ongoing matter across the city, depending on our financial resources. So I think those who've already got underground power should still are enjoying the benefits of that every year since we've been able to undertake that project, and we want to be able to provide that similar benefit to the rest of the City of Vincent.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe a clarification question on that. My understanding of the 2.1% is this is to help us set up a loan facility. So people will be able to effectively borrow money to pay for underground power now and then repay it. So would it be fair to say that the benefit to people that are not specifically from this is that those funds, once they're repaid, will then go into asset renewal, and then we'll renew our assets across the city in subsequent years?
Through Mayor Cole, that's correct in part. The 2.1% will become a rolling fund. We'll recoup that money, but there will be a delay in recouping that money. We'll attach an interest rate, which will reflect the cost of those deferred terms. It'll be up to council once this program's been completed, which could be 4, 5, 6 years' time. It'll be up to council in a meeting like tonight, where you're adopting the budget, to decide what to do with that money if and when it's available. And always you could pay down debt, you could hold it in reserves, or you could put it or direct it towards another city project program or service. As you can see, as the director mentioned, we do have a large amount of backlog in terms of our asset maintenance requirements. That decision of what to do with that money, which we'll hold and we'll recoup, maybe not all of it all at once. That'll be up to council to decide in the future when we have those surplus funds.
Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a further clarification on that. So currently those funds, this fund will go into the underground power reserve and then cycle around in there. And then there needs to be a resolution by administration, by council to move that. But in our long-term financial plan, which I realise has not been adopted but has been circulated and discussed with council, my understanding was that showed those funds being allocated into asset renewal in subsequent later years. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, that would be our intention, and that would be a council decision when we present the long-term financial plan. The director showed the graphs about what are relatively low levels of reserves given our asset requirements. So we would be suggesting that those funds, once we've completed the underground power project, which could be in 4 or 5 years' time, which is a long time in the future, and there's a lot of undergrounding of power to be done between now and then, that we would be looking to hold those funds in reserves so council is in a position to direct those reserve funds into other capital works projects that council decides at that time.
And the achieving our asset renewal target that we have an outstanding audit action on, that assumes that those funds are allocated from the underground power in subsequent years into asset renewal. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, this is probably where the recent correspondence from Western Power becomes more important. So the current 2.1%, we're talking about just under $800,000 in terms of rate revenue, which will go into reserve next financial year. We'll nearly certainly be proposing to council that we'll need to have a similar amount of funding through rates to increase that reserve next financial year as well. And at that time, we'll know from Western Power what our payment requirements will be. The next round of projects, if council approves them, which will be 5, will be much larger on top of that. And that's really where we need to get some definition from Western Power about what the financial implications will be of those reserves. But that could be, that will be a challenge. It will absolutely be a challenge for us financially. But this 2.1% now is an important first small step in terms of our journey to be able to complete that underground power program. We do the capital funding over the 10 years of the LTFP. When we update the LTFP, when we know what the time frame will be for the next 5 projects, we could be into year 5 or 6 of the LTFP. Therefore, those funds, if we, depending on what they would be and what we can forecast them to be at the end, would probably be allocated to the last 4 years of the long-term financial plan for asset management and sustainability. And that is certainly an important step in the right direction as well.
Councillors? Councillor Apollo?
I mean, just picking up on very good questions from both Councillor Loden and Alexander. I think my question to administration, to try and sum this up, is administration's argument about equity for the 2.1%, A, that everyone will benefit because it's the whole area, even if you've already got it in your immediate area, and B, to Councillor Loden's point, if there's an argument that this money that is going to benefit people more directly because they're the ones in the who are going to get underground power in the immediate future, if that money is going to roll through and eventually go back and pay for operational costs or through some sustainable reserve, that the secondary argument is that sometime down the track, 5 or 6 years, when this is all said and done, that if you're still a property owner at that time, you will get some benefit down the track because it's going to go back into the kitty. Is that basically the argument?
Through Mayor Cole, that was very well put from Councillor Oppelos. That's yes, I probably said it in a much longer form way. I'd just like to make a point about underground power. Nobody lives just in their house and in the 10 or 15 metres just outside their house. Most of us walk down streets of their neighbours and ride their bikes and drive. It is going to be a much nicer environment to be able to walk, ride or drive through cool shady streets throughout the city of Vincent, where they're shaded in summer because we've got proper tree canopy on both sides of the street. You've got wildlife coming back into the city because we're providing some trees for the birds to be able to nest in, and the benefit of the maintenance costs for the roads and footpaths will certainly improve as well as we improve the infrastructure. I could speak about the benefits of underground power for a long time, but
I'm thinking I might have to put the timer on you, CEO.
Okay, but there's a whole of community benefit from what will be a once in a generation upgrade to our street lighting. We get very regular requests from residents about poor lighting, which creates an insecure environment when people are walking home at night. We're going to be putting brand new street lighting with LEDs throughout our lights, throughout our streets in all these suburbs, which all residents use when they're walking home at night or riding, and that'll provide a huge community safety benefit, which we could never have achieved without this underground power project.
Thank you, CEO. Any last questions before we move? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Just one, and perhaps David can talk to me afterwards and supply me with the answer, because some of it will be repeating yourself, I suspect. But I've had a number of people who've bought into the district and bought into underground power, so they've already paid the premium on the house for the underground power. So perhaps you could tell me later how I give them an answer about what the value is, because I've heard some of it and I'm not so sure that they'll be happy with that. But perhaps we can have a chat later rather than everyone else enduring, the answer. Thanks.
Through Mayor Cole, just a quick response, and I might paraphrase Councillor Oppelos. Those funds from the 2.1% will be held by council, and council then can decide whether you want to direct those funds to any part of the city for any project or program in the future. And that could be something very specific to, just for illustrative purposes, that could be a playground upgrade in the Highgate East area, or more road resurfacing or footpath upgrade. If there was any concern from council about equity, those equity issues should be addressed across the board as we map out the capital works program over the next 4 years. Those funds can be directed if council think there's an equity issue in a different direction at the time, which would probably now be 4 or 5 years budgets away.
Perhaps to also put this into perspective, I think we're talking about $735,000. The first project was estimated at $17 million contribution from the City of Vincent. That was before we included Scarborough Beach Road and Oxford Street, Mount Hawthorn in the town centre. We've been told that we'll be having to make 3 call-in payments to Western Power, so $5.6 million up front. So it's quite a drop in the ocean when you consider $5.6 million as a first payment of that $17 million just for the first 3. So the city is also going to have to draw on things like the Tamala Park Reserve and other reserves available. So it's actually not a substantial amount when you compare the fact that the first call-in payment will be in the magnitude of 5.6 million or higher now that we're including the town centre of Mount Hawthorn.
Thanks. And through you, Mayor Cole, when council sees the co-funding agreement next year, we'll probably nearly certainly need to stagger and then stage those projects. So of the 3 we currently have signed up to, we'll commence one. There might be some overlap between finishing one and starting the other, but we'll be looking to smooth out those payments because they are large and daunting given the size of our reserves. So the $800,000 this financial year coming, plus nearly certainly the same amount next year with some reliance on reserves will help make sure that we're in a position to meet the peak payments of those cash calls from Western Power when we're hitting the peak between the delay from recouping what would be the service charge from the property owners.
Any further questions? Okay, I'll ask for a mover to move the budget. Moved by Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded by Councillor Castle. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. As in every year, the process of preparing this budget has been a balancing act. I know that we must do more to ensure that we maintain our facilities, our roads, our building assets, our footpaths, parks, parking infrastructure, drainage, trees, and the list goes on. But I also know that we couldn't build a budget this year without consideration of the unprecedented set of global circumstances that impact our local community. So we're looking at a 7.6 rate increase, which will go some way towards bringing us towards a rate in the dollar that is appropriate for the delivery of our community vision and the objectives of our strategic community plan. The fact is that comparable local governments bring in more rates than we do. Their budgets are bigger because of this, and they can deliver more for their community, and they have healthier reserves. Reserves are important. They allow the city to save over time for larger projects, much like I do in my home, so that we don't have hugely fluctuating rates year on year. Plus, they allow us to have a buffer in place against unfavourable economic conditions or to take advantage of significant opportunities. The fact is the City of Vincent has used a variety of mechanisms to keep the rates burden low since I've been on council. And this includes drawing down on reserves and putting off capital works expenditure. It just can't continue. I don't believe it's financially prudent or fair on the community or future councils to leave this matter unaddressed. As in recent years, we've really increased our knowledge base on the renewal deficit that we face. We've had adverse findings. And we also have increased our understanding of the true costs of delivering projects, programs and services in alignment with our strategic community plan. We need to be in a financial position to maintain our assets and to deliver against our objectives. Canopy increase through underground power, quality transport network that supports the transition away from single vehicle use, contemporary residential waste service, parks and public spaces, community facilities, efficient and responsive administration, and support for our businesses, volunteer and community groups that bring so much benefit to our city. I think these really essentially form the basics of modern local government. Some of the things, a bit of a random selection that'll be delivered this year: public toilets at Banks Reserve, a new park in North Perth, a roundabout near a busy dog park in Highgate Kindy, traffic calming for Forest Street, refurbishing tennis courts into netball courts at Robertson Park, ongoing repairs to the median and lighting on Beaufort Street, more than $300,000 on drainage as we deal with increasing storm events due to climate change, IT infrastructure to ensure we keep our data protected, and urgent electrical works in the Beatty Park grandstand. I think it is disappointing that we're not in a position to be adopting a corporate business plan, capital works program and long-term financial plan at this time. I think it's important because then we can see that delaying renewal works is just kicking the problem down the road. 85% of our capital works program is renewal. And I do believe that new works have a strong alignment to our existing and approved plans. And these are commitments to the community and aren't just plucked out from the sky. And we've also prioritised works that attract external funding contributions. There's also work that requires human capital but may not be in a capital works program, delivering ongoing improvements to our planning framework so that it remains contemporary, on the ground support and engagement of business community, undertaking events so that we can celebrate what makes us unique and connect to our community, maintaining our local history and library collection, inspections, enforcement and monitoring of our local laws, administering programs for families and seniors at the Vincent Community Centre, managing projects like underground power and the Leederville land proposals, assessing hardship claims, processing $119,000 in rates waivers for 24 community and sporting groups, and ensuring the Vincent community is aware of what's going on, what's changing, and how they can have input into council decision making. On the parking, the city has modified its approach to parking fees and charges in response to community consultation, and I note we do have an amendment on the table in relation to monitoring the impact of this change. and ensuring we have enough short-term bays that are unpaid, which I am supportive of. And whilst it's not in part of the fees and charges in this budget, I did want to draw attention to part of our accessible city strategy, which is an action to move toward demand responsive pricing. I'm supportive of this action, and moving to a more contemporary parking model will allow us to look at changing the cost of parking according to demand, which is often linked to time of day, as Andrew mentioned in his statement earlier. So there is work to be done in this space. And I think that we can look to incentivise parking at the right time without necessarily incentivising at times when we don't need to. On underground power, we need to have access to funds which will allow our city to take advantage of the opportunity before us. There's going to be a gap between when we get billed from Western Power and when our residents that are directly benefiting from underground power make their payments to the city. And that's what this is for. So once we finish that project, we can use reserve funds for the myriad of asset renewal projects.
Councillor Gontaszewski, you've reached 5 minutes, but
we're very short. Yep. I just want to say I've been on council for a long time now. There's not a lot of fat on the bone in the budget. We're doing hard things that need to be done, taking advantage of opportunities and addressing a historic underspend on the renewal of our community assets. I don't believe we can run for this. I certainly can't. I don't think I have the luxury of doing so. I don't think it would be prudent, and I don't think it would be fair. Thank you.
thank you very much, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I share a similar sentiment. In fact, I've got some of the exact same words written on my page that Councillor Gontaszewski just said. I don't think there's any denying that this is an extremely difficult budget. It's the hardest one I've ever been involved in. And I do think that part of the reason for that is because in previous years, in my time on council, we have shied away from making some hard decisions. We are seeing now that the true cost of that historic underspend on our maintenance of our assets, we're seeing the cost of underspend on wages of our staff. And we're seeing this quite clearly and sharply through audit findings. It's not something that we can ignore. I think that when we look at comparisons between spends over the last few years, we have to bear in mind that we're not comparing it to an appropriate base. We're comparing it to an underspend. And I think that has certainly been very clear through this budget program that we can't ignore that any longer. And in my view, it would be irresponsible to not address that at this budget. I wrote down the words, kicking the problem down the road, just as you said. And I feel that that is what we would be doing, what we've done before, and what we would be saddling future councils with is a continuation of the problem that we have. I'm not surprised that the feedback we got was not in support of a 7.6% pay rate increase. Who would take the time to fill in a survey to say, yes, please, I would like to pay more money? I understand that that is difficult for the community and particularly difficult in the current climate. But I also think that we have to balance that against the benefits and the services that our community tells us they want, and that is important to them. We have seen that through our original strategic community plan, and that's been reinforced through the recent review of that. We know that our community values some of the unique services that we offer, including events, including arts installations, including what some members will call discretionary spends and others will say an essential part of life in Vincent. We just had a discussion about that user pays versus community benefit model when you come to talking about paying for something like underground power. We're not going to be going down a path where we survey our community and ask them, do you use BD Park? Do you want to pay for BD Park in your rates? That's not how local government, that's not how any level of government can work. And there will always be an element of rates that you pay for a service that you do not use. You will benefit because of the community that we create and the environment that we create. And I see that it's easy and it's probably a natural reaction to look at a 2.1% increase specifically for underground power and say, personally, I won't get that benefit, but the community will benefit and you will benefit from the environment that's created. I'm also confident that we have really scrutinised this budget and looked for ways to make savings, to cut costs. I don't think there's much more to cut that the community really wants, particularly when you look at the results of our strategic community plan. So it is that balancing act. In reality, we probably should have had a 15% pay rise. That would have gotten us better on track for where we need to be. But we know that that is not something that we can introduce in one fell swoop. And we know that that's not fair on the community. So it's about finding that balance between where we need to be, where we feel comfortable being, and making a plan to go forward. This is a continuation of that path to financial maturity, something that we have been discussing on council for some time, knowing that there would be a cost involved once we had more detail and more data to actually base that on. And I feel that we are at that place now. In relation to parking, I really thank administration for the consultation that they conducted to see how the community feels about this. It's a new idea and we knew there would be reaction and opinions on it. And it's been pretty clear from the consultation that the community is not in favour of that option. But that money has to be found somewhere in the budget. We have to address that. We can't simply cut it and not do anything else. And I think that the alternative that's been proposed is a creative way to address that. I'm really conscious, and I said this at the last, have I reached my time? Sorry. I'll wrap up.
I think administration's giving a free 60 seconds, but the CEO's just raised with me. I don't think it's going to be picked up as a big deal, but you did mention a 15% pay rise as opposed to rate rise.
Rate rise.
I think it was
rate
quite
rise.
clear what you meant, but just
15%
yes.
rate rise. I apologise.
Yep.
Parking. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. This is yeah, I'm very conscious of the comments I made when we dealt with this a month ago, is that we're talking about sharing the load here. We're talking about reducing the impact on the ratepayer by finding alternative sources of revenue. If we don't use parking as an example as a mechanism for this, then the ratepayer will be paying either through higher rates or through reduced services. And I'm conscious that we're already asking more of our ratepayer. Let's not ask even more on top of that.
We'll have to ask you to wrap up to be fair to all.
We'll wrap up to say that I am comfortable with the recommendation that is proposed. I do support the amendment that hasn't been presented yet on the yellow, but we'll wait to see if that is presented. And I commend administration for all their hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Councillors? Councillor Arpolo?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. The budget process is actually quite simple. We estimate expenditure, we deduct revenues from sources other than rates, and what's left, what the shortfall is what we request/demand from ratepayers. Now, a critical part of the budgeting process, and this is where the complexity is differentiating between essential services and discretionary spend. And ratepayers want value for money. They want us to deliver essential services efficiently and moderate discretionary spend so rates are only increased modestly. When I started the budget process in February as a new councillor and as a chartered accountant of over 25 years, I tabled 3 items for administration's consideration. The first was to look at curbing operating costs. When I looked at this, looking at a graph of operating costs over the last 9 years, we can see that the amount for this year, 68 million, is quite significant. If we exclude the one-off $7 million payment that we paid for exiting a waste contract, it's over 11 million, I think, is roughly the increase from last year. And you can see that trend is increasing if you go back from FY14. The second point was do not budget for capital expenditure programs that we cannot deliver. Again, I just looked to the history of this, and the red represents the budgeted costs, capital costs every year for the last 9 years. and the blue represents what we actually spent. So collectively over these 9 years, administration has actually budgeted $51 million over what it could actually spend. Now, there is also, even when last year we had a significant CapEx, we reviewed it at half year, but we still got it wrong in terms of quantum, and we're still quite a way out. What the concern is on CapEx particularly is that the actual spend, the most we've ever spent in any single financial year over the last 9 years is 9.5 million back in FY17. And what we're proposing here tonight during this budget is close to 21 million. It's double what we've ever spent in a single year. I'm not saying that we shouldn't spend more on CapEx, but where my question is can we deliver this? And more importantly, we're asking ratepayers to fund something that we might not actually deliver. And the third item was tackling debt. So we're at 15 million debt. That's the maximum, and that's a representative of, you can say underrating or overspending in the past, but if you don't have the money, it's more likely overspend. That's why we drew on debt. My considered concern with administration's budget is that what's being presented tonight doesn't really, I don't see any evidence of operational savings, and I appreciate Virginia's comments in the presentation that she has a great amount of experience in this, and I'll be looking forward to seeing that come to fruition over the coming years to see if we can curb these, this very big increase in operational cost. The second was that, the second thing was, does this budget deliver reasonable amount of capital expenditure? And I don't think that we can actually deliver 21 million. And does it deliver debt reduction? No, we're just doing normal pay downs. So I think we're going to reduce by 1.4, which is great, but that's just the normal debt repayments. There's two further concerning aspects in the budget. The first is the 2.1% for underground levy. We've spoken about that. I don't quite agree with administration's arguments on that. And the second is the removal of 1 hour free parking. Councillors know my opinion on this. I think it's got catastrophic consequences written all over it. Tonight, I'd like to hear what other councillors have to say, because we come here with our minds not made up. We've got to listen to debate. I'd like to propose two motions respectfully. One, to address the 7.6% rating increase, and the other to retain 1 hour free parking. I'd like to talk to both of those if I have your support to allow me to present those cases. Thank you.
Before we do that, I think we'll just continue with the substantive motion for now, just to see if other councillors wish to speak first. So councillors, any further debate on the substantive motion? Councillor Alexander.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Look, I seem to see a disparity between what the administration wants, which is increase in building reserves, and what some elected members want. And my view, representing ratepayers, I have some empathy for the situation at the moment as far as the cost of living is concerned. But I also think Vincent has the money, and some of the money appears to be lazy money, particularly in the capital expenditure side of things. And I think, there's some good ways to use the money where we can actually help our ratepayers without necessarily going too far in asking for increases. And we all want the best for our community. I appreciate that. And, I think, putting 7.6% forward was quite reasonable in the first thing. But I think there's a perfect storm happening at the moment, and the cost of living has soared, as we know, triggered by the pandemic, and, certainly not helped by the war in Europe. There's havoc in supply chains, energy, fuel, fertiliser, food, all has gone up. Runaway inflation, something like 7%, which is a reason also for council to be looking at a rate increase. Interest rates have gone up 3 times, including 0.5% today. There's been low wage growth for 10 years, 10% super losses for some, and some Australian families are really, really vulnerable at this stage. And I think it's certainly, from my point of view, I have an empathy for some of the people who maybe can't handle that sort of increase. And I think there's a better way that we can use the money and still have a rate rise. And, you know, Councillor Iopolo has a couple of amendments there, which, you know, I'm certainly happy to talk to. But I think it's incumbent on particularly the elected members to have an understanding of where our community is at, and is it a good time to be asking them for extra money to go into reserves and these sorts of things. I think there's a perfect storm. It's a one-off in Australian, certainly West Australian history, I believe, in where people are. And I think we need to have some empathy with regard to the rate rise, but I'm not opposed to some rate rise.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillors? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I just wanted to say focusing on the percentage increase, as many people keep doing, is in isolation is misleading given what it's actually based on, and doesn't take into account a decade of underrating by previous councils, resulting in a lack of investment in asset maintenance. As noted by a resident in their written public question for tonight, addressing historical financial management issues now rather than continuing to ignore them seems like the right approach, and I agree. Absolutely, our community is facing cost of living pressures, and these pressures also apply to the costs of our city doing business. And so I don't think that we can just pretend that things are able to be delivered as is. And we've had a good 6 months of workshops and meetings talking about budget items that we could cut. Nothing particularly has come forward. We've gone through line by line. Love to see some options, but pretty late to be bringing them to the table on the night of the budget.
Councillors? Look, I'll speak to the budget. A lot has already been covered, but I think there's a few key things, and probably just picking up on where we're at and the circumstances that we face. I find that we really can't look at this year in isolation, because we've just come through 2 years of COVID measures, and the city took measures and had issues upon us, just like many businesses and people in our community. We had a 2-year rate freeze for commercial businesses. So whilst the state government intervened and said, you must have a rate freeze in 2021, they did not make us have a rate freeze the following year for commercial, and that was really linked to the change that we made to commercial waste. And as a result, our commercial ratepayers basically, we find ourselves in the situation where the residential rate in the dollar is 19% higher compared to the commercial rate in the dollar. Interestingly, when we went through this commercial rate change, a couple of people contacted me that were living in commercial premises, and they were struggling with the fact that their bins had been removed. They'd been quoted the $520 for the micro bin service, and they said, this is outrageous. This is a cost impost. And of course, it was very different to what they had previously dealt with, and they were, you know, considering the fairness of that. I asked the rates team to calculate what their residential rates would be if it was actually zoned residential, if the use was residential, and it appeared from a couple of examples that they would actually pay more in residential rates, even if they were a commercial, compared to being a commercial rate payer with a micro service, it was still cheaper than paying residential rates at the same property. So it is the case. I've seen direct comparisons. So over the last 2 years of COVID measures, and I think it was, in terms of this idea of the city running lean, I think it was really instrumental sitting on the COVID subcommittee with Councillor Castle and Councillor Gontaszewski on the weekly basis, going through our budget. We actually really drew back during that period because we lost $4.7 million in revenue, partly because of Beatty Park having to close, partly because of what was happening in car parks and in terms of infringements, the impacts on our business. If you look at the rate increase and take it over that 3-year period, it's a 2.353% increase for commercial over the 3 years and a 3.3% increase for residential. So these last 2 years do have to be factored in terms of where the circumstances that we faced, the measures that we took. We used our our reserves in creative ways. For example, our Leederville Gardens Reserve, we're able to open that up and provide support to public benevolent organisations. We used our cash in lieu for Percent for Art to support local artists who are struggling and hit very hard. It was a really strong exercise in understanding what was available, how it could be utilised, where we could pare back. And it really emphasised to me that the City of Vincent runs lean. I do have the privilege of being at the City of Vincent and interacting with staff on a daily basis. And I know that not all council members have that experience. So I work with teams, I interact with people, I have a good sense of what people are working on. I see them when they look stressed and when they're overworked. I can see like the effect on the finance team alone just in preparing this budget. We've had people working with COVID during this time. We've had people working when they were sick just to get the job done. And I have raised with the CEO, this actually does concern me. So, you know, we've got an extremely hardworking team. And, you know, when you look at discretionary spending, some of the discussions that we had at our workshops were things like, do we want to cut one of the native plant sales? Do we want to cut the compostable bags that we're trying to embed into the FOGO system as we teach our community how to use the FOGO system and not contaminate the FOGO bin, because that then leads to additional costs. Because if it's contaminated, we're sending it to the tip and the costs go up. Do we want to cut our tree planting budget? Do we want to sacrifice the good progress that we're making in terms of realising tree canopy in the public realm? We asked the question about Beatty Park staffing. They'd been reduced during COVID levels. We said to administration, do we need to go back to full 100% staffing at Beatty Park? And they were clearly able to demonstrate to us that if they did, that produced revenue to the city, because these people were linked to running classes and the operations would be, you know, receiving more funding. And Beatty Park is actually operating at a surplus for the first time in many years. When I joined council, it certainly wasn't. You know, we grappled with public toilets. We grappled to bring Banks Reserve Toilet back onto the capital works budget. We talked about the fact that we really do need to start putting toilets in at the Beatty Park Reserve at Birdwood. We need to grapple with public toilets in Leederville. They're not on the capital works budget for this year, but they possibly should be. We're not talking about vanity projects. This is something I hear from our harshest critics. Anything that's new is grant funded. So we were lucky to secure some funding from John Kerry as our local member for new projects like a skate park, courts, multi-courts at Robertson Park, courts at Birdwood when we can afford to put a toilet there. The majority of the stuff on our capital works program is the bare essentials. It's really getting to the drainage, the footpaths, the public toilets. We have scrutinised this line by line, and I have absolutely struggled to see what should be removed, but I've seen what should be on there. In terms of debt, I'd just like to say that I've been on council for 8.5 years, and there's 2 lots of debt that's been accrued in that time. One was $1 million for Beatty Park equipment, when we actually weighed up the benefit of buying the equipment versus leasing the equipment, and the business case stacked up. We had the unfortunate situation shared with our 7-member councils at the Mindarie Regional Council that a former council had in place a 25-year contract on a 2-bin sorting system, on a system that was probably should have been known at the time that in 25 years our waste situation in Perth would hopefully change, because it was pretty draconian back then. It effectively was sorting out rubbish from our bin, sorting it into something that was not actually compost, was really just something that could be put on freeways with glass glittering in the sunshine, low quality, below par, what would you call that? We don't have a member of the parks team here. It's not compost, but something that tried to emanate that. We had to make that decision as a member of Mindarie Regional Council, and you know, we're a minority on that council. $7 million debt. It was extremely difficult to actually have to do that. But we did the business case, and we knew that that would have a significant impact on our gate fee for landfilling. And we knew that we had to do that if we were going FOGO, because the FOGO system was the death of the 2-bin sorting resource recovery facility. We also have just conversations afoot and work happening at Mindarie Regional Council to try to pare back some of that cost that was borne by the 7-member councils by putting out an expression of interest to either sell that land or lease that facility to try to recoup that. So I'm hoping that that is not a debt that stays on the books for a long time. If you look at the debt that stays on the books for the long time, we're still paying off the Department of Sport and Rec building. We're still paying off the 2012 renovation to Beatty Park. We're paying off debt that was accrued by former councils many years before us. This is a situation that we face. And when you consider this budget, of course, you know, this has been the hardest budget I've ever sat on in terms of the decisions that we have to make. I woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning thinking about the budget. I've been thinking about this budget for a long time. And one of the drivers for me is to leave the City of Vincent in a better place than when I came to this council. I came to this council in 2013, and the first budget that was delivered had a $3.8 million hole in it because of a transposition error in the financial statements. This, in terms of actually, that really started this whole process of actually trying to be in a better financial position. We have a long-term financial plan. We have a 4-year capital works program. There is a good question here, and I will put this to administration again, because we put this to administration during the budget workshops. Will you be able to deliver the capital works program? We've asked this every year. Every single year, this question has been put to administration. And we said to administration, we are running really light in our reserves. It's not that we don't need this money, because this is the first time that we're going to reach our 0.9 asset sustainability ratio based on the capital works program and asset renewal. That's where we had our audit finding. That is absolutely important that we do that. Should it sit in the CapEx program, or should it sit in reserves and be apportioned on the 4-year capital works program? That's the question, but I don't think that receiving of the money is the problem. It's about whether it's deliverable in 1 year or whether they're multi-year projects that should be appearing over the 4-year capital works program. And that's why we established that, so that we run like the state government and we have forward estimates. We can show the community. We can't do the Banks Reserve toilet this year, which I'm hoping that we can, because I think it's actually really important, but we'll be doing it in this year. And we're going to take $100,000 in rates, because that's a $200,000 cost, and we'll take the $100,000 for the next year. That's the intention of having a 4-year capital works program. So we have 3 big issues when I think about this budget. We have inflation and rising costs, just like householders. We have the maintenance of our assets, which we embarked upon a process to really get on top of this, which was happening before COVID hit. And we also have this incredible opportunity to roll out underground power, not just for the 3 project areas, but for 8. And whilst we don't have all of the details, and as soon as we have them, we will make sure we get that out to the community, we stand to be able to deliver underground power across the vast majority, if not all, of the City of Vincent. So that is an opportunity that perhaps has come at the wrong time, but it has to be grasped, because if we don't do it, Western Power replaces poles and wires, and we lose that opportunity for another generation. Have I gone well over? I'll stop there. I had much more to say, but 5 minutes goes fast. Does anyone who hasn't spoken to the substantive wish to speak, or should we go to amendments? Okay, we'll go to amendments. Who wishes to move an amendment? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the amendment on the yellow. If I can get a seconder, it's essentially requesting that admin monitor the impact of the $1 change to first hour.
Is there a seconder? Seconded, oh, sorry. Seconded by Councillor Apollo, I think.
Thank you. Free of charge parking is not some natural state of affairs that's being interfered with by council at this time. It's a resource held in common by the whole community that needs to be managed. Decisions to provide free parking, even for a limited time, ignore the opportunity costs of providing it and result in all ratepayers funding it rather than only those that use it, of which a large majority are not ratepayers. I'm all for us cross-subsidising services and infrastructure based on equity reasons, but the continued provision of free parking is contrary to strategic policy direction that we've had in the city for over a decade, so it's hardly policy on the run. And I quote from our own car parking strategy: "It's fundamental to recognise that there is no such thing as free parking. Vincent ratepayers are not only paying for the cost of cleaning, insurance and maintenance of these spaces, they're subsidising parking on valuable land that could be generating income or could be put to other uses. Paying for public provision and management of parking from general rates is regressive and disproportionately impacts those on low and fixed incomes, such as students and the elderly, and those ratepayers who elect to use alternative forms of transport and do not normally drive cars. Parking is never free, the costs are simply subsumed elsewhere in the economy. The challenge for Vincent is to find a balance between adequate parking supply to ensure the vitality of the businesses and district centres in the town and the environmental, social and economic necessity towards more efficient use of transportation, infrastructure and travel demand management techniques, end quote. I think that the $1 for the first hour of parking with the provision of the additional equity bays maintains that balance. But I do understand that there is concern in the community, and this has been raised before whenever parking changes are proposed, that there might be an impact. So this amendment, whilst maintaining the move to a fee of $1 for first hour parking, requests that administration monitor the impact to number of transactions and revenue following the change to ascertain any detrimental impact on occupancy or use of city car parks, and provide a report back to council by April 2023, and also review the usage of time-limited 15-minute and 30-minute only street bays following the introduction to ensure that there is still some short-term visitor parking availability.
Councillor Uplow.
Can I just reserve my right to speak at the end? Thanks, Mayor.
Sure. Councillors. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, as I referred to in speaking on the substantive, I'm supportive of this amendment. I think that overall the proposal is solid, but I do think it's prudent to build some monitoring into that just to ascertain what the impact is. So I'm supportive of the amendment.
Councillors, Councillor Alexander.
I would have thought that council would have looked at other councils that have done this, and so would have had some pre-warning of what was likely to happen, rather than just move straight into this and then research what you've done. So what did you look at to model this on?
Sorry, can I just clarify what the question was? What did we model the $1 introduction on?
Well, yeah, who come up with $1 an hour, and is that happening somewhere and there's evidence, or someone from the City of Vincent come up with, we'll have $1, we'll jump into it. Have we consulted the businesses about this, and what do they think about that? Do they think it's a good idea or a bad idea? We're just going to do it, and then 3 or 6 months later we're going to see how it looks.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the $1 figure was proposed, and we recommended it based on essentially being nominal, being of such a small number that it wouldn't have an impact on somebody's decision to go and buy a cup of coffee for $4.50, or to do a short shop, or to go out for a meal, which $1 would be a very small percentage of what could have been an overall visitor trip. We also, people already need to get a ticket from a ticket machine in order to access that currently 1 hour free parking, and we don't think it would change people's behaviour to want to visit our town centres to pay $1 for that ticket, when they're essentially paying around $3 currently for the second hour, and there are still a lot of people who will drive under any cost, including rising fuel prices and the like. So people who are committed to driving, I don't think will be deterred by a nominal increase of $1 for that first hour.
So you're not aware of any other councils that are doing this?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we know councils do use parking and subsidise it by providing free parking, which we have been doing for a long time. We're proposing to continue to subsidise that to a very, very high level. The proposal is just about a very small reduction in that subsidy from the city to people using that land.
So I take that as no, you don't know any others that are doing it.
Through Mayor Cole, most cities around the world, when land values get to a certain price within the city areas, do help try to address the supply-demand equation by introducing a price mechanism. So putting a price on that car parking is the most common form of balancing a limited supply of car parking with demand. And Perth is probably 10, 15 or 20 years behind most other major cities in the world in doing this.
The City of Perth are trying to attract people by having free parking. Business people I talk to are really, really nervous about losing the free parking. They're concerned that we'll end up like Subiaco. So, you know, from all the evidence I've seen of consultations with business, would you agree that largely businesses are opposed to the dollar?
Through Mayor Cole, we have the survey results. It's absolutely the case that when you've been providing something for free or heavily subsidised, if you start to increase the cost, there's very rarely a lot of support for reducing the subsidy of a good or service, or providing something which was free to the customer, adding a charge. So I absolutely agree that the community feedback is overwhelmingly negative on this. The City of Perth only has trialled providing some free parking in the evenings only, when their car parks are already empty, because they're only full during the day for commuters, and on weekends to attract shoppers in some of the car parks which would otherwise be empty. They're not providing free parking during the day.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
I was just going to say that in Councillor Alexander, in City of Perth, in some of their short-term bays, there's like a minimum fee. So I do think that essentially what we're saying is that the minimum fee is $1, and then going on from there, if you're there for longer than now, you pay more. And I think that is in place in some parking meters in other local governments, but I'm unaware of the impact of that in terms of their on-street parking. But I think that effectively this is a minimum parking charge with, you know, higher fees should you stay for an extended period.
Councillors, Councillor Warner.
I'm supportive of this amendment, but I really wish I didn't have to be. I really wish that in reality we didn't have to pay for what was already given to us. But free parking isn't free, and we need to try to share this burden. City of Perth is not giving free. I've paid an hour for an hour, $8 to an hour and a half on the weekend. So we can't compare apples and oranges. Where it's quite easy to seem to do that, but it doesn't actually pair out like that. I really wish we didn't have to do anything for parking here, but I feel like it's time that we do need to. We need to make it equitable across all of the community here, not just for the businesses, but for the different community areas that we have. I'm also really keen to try to make this as simplistic as possible. We want to encourage people to use the Pay app, and I'd really like to explore possibilities of making that really easy for people to find out how to use and using it. We've done things in the past with postcards and that kind of stuff to try to get it out there, but I think people really need to learn how to use this, and we'll see that it is quite a simplistic thing, but it can be quite confronting when you parked your car and you have to go and pay for something or get a ticket and you don't quite know what to do at that moment. You're in a rush somewhere. So I'd really like to try to find a way to make that as easy as possible. Yeah, once again, I wish we didn't have to go down this path, but I feel like we really do.
Thanks, Councillor Warner. Councillors, any further comments? You wish to speak last? Well, then I'll speak. This is really intended to provide a safety net and sort of respond to some of the, I think, the fears and concerns that have been expressed through the survey results about, whether this does have impacts. Administration's given the example of the Barley Street car park and what happened there when we actually removed first hour free altogether, went straight to full charging. And that was really linked to the fact that we own 1/3 of that car park and we were spending $80,000 per annum on ratepayers' money just to pay the lease on that car park at one point. So it was about trying to make that cost neutral so that residents and ratepayers weren't having to support that car park. That actually has not resulted in the impacts that we thought. But there is concern, and I think that really does need to be noted. And what this really does is point to the fact that parking does have to be responsive and it can change. So if there are catastrophic impacts, which I would probably think not at this stage, otherwise I wouldn't be supporting going in this direction. But if I'm wrong and that happens, the structural change from administration is to put stickers on the existing signage and to reprogram the machines and Easy Park. So it's not a high spend exercise. And if we do get it wrong, we can reverse it. So it's really about saying we need to monitor, we think this will be okay. Not all of us, but some of us think this will be okay. I'm one of them that thinks it will be okay. I haven't wanted to touch first hour free in my entire time on council, but I think that it started. The budget discussion started from the perspective of how do we diversify the impact. We had that really interesting spend map data from the work that we're doing with the Curtin University students, which showed that in Leederville, for example, 83% of consumers are coming from outside of the city of Vincent. So it was really coming from that place of trying to diversify the revenue so that ratepayers didn't continue to fully fund everything, and that we are, it's been pointed out many times, we are subsidising this to the tune of at least $2 million, and it's about having a nominal fee attached. If that nominal fee of $1 does cause some kind of detrimental impact, then council, if they support this this amendment, would be saying we want to understand that and we want some data before we would reconsider doing this for the following budget year. It also requested administration monitor and review the use of time-limited 15 and 30-minute bays. Those are the bays where you don't actually need to interact with the ticket machine. You don't need to activate Easy Park. You do to get your first hour free currently. So this is for those convenient drop-ins where you're literally picking up a coffee, doing a prescription, doing that extremely quick and directed type of interaction that perhaps residents are more inclined to do than visitors who are coming to have a dining experience, for example. So it's about saying, do we have that level of 15-minute and 30-minute bays right? I regularly use the 15-minute bays at Leederville. They churn over extremely well. I would say every time I drop in at lunchtime, which is a busy time in the Avenue car park, there is someone pulling out and you can actually park extremely easily in those bays. So the churn factor is extremely good and effective. So it's about putting in place some safety nets in response to some of the concerns that have been raised. Councillor Apollo.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Just before I start, just a quick question to administration on procedure, because I've got an opposing motion on the table. If we vote for this one, do we go back to the substantive and then I do mine? That's just to clarify.
Yes, that's correct.
Great, thanks. So I think these are good amendments, Mayor Cole. I think that even though I've got something that's opposed to the parking, I think what you've put here does make sense. The question is, I think the report, I just wondered if this was, maybe it's an amendment to your amendment, but the reporting back to council by April, I thought should be both 4.4 and 4.5. Is that what your intention was, or just 4.4?
The amendment is for both clauses, both in the red.
No, the reporting back to council, is that only for 4.4 or 4.4 and 4.5?
Oh, don't have a date. Well, I just sort of thought that would be something that would come before April, personally. Would you be prepared to accept a date on that, CEO, in terms of, can you give me an indication of how quickly you could come back?
Through Mayor Cole, we could add April 2023 to that as well, but to make the point that we often, including through our place managers, interact with businesses about changes to on-street bays and whether needed loading bay there or change something from an hour to a 15-minute bay here. So that is something we do on an ongoing basis. And if we're going to make a major change, we'd come back to council to advise on that. But in terms of whether or not we need to make a bigger change on some of our streets for time limited 15 and 30-minute bays, we could bring that back at the same time as the report to council on the impact on occupancy from the proposal for the $1 for the first
Do you
hour
need
in
that?
April
Do you need that
2023.
in as part of the motion, or will you accept that that's the intent and that you will do that?
It could be added, but we'll absolutely come back to council at the same time to provide that advice on the
that's
time limited
fine.
bays.
This is a good amendment. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak that hasn't? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried. We're back to the substantive.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got, we're talking to the, if I can get a seconder to hear my case for proposing amendment on the green.
On the green, Councillor Alexander is seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Oplow.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, 1 hour free to 30 minutes free to no free. Visitors pay $1 from minute one. Just a couple of points on this because it's bewildering from my perspective. One, urban centres are social hubs where the community comes together to shop, dine and meet friends and family. The vibrancy of each centre is critical. Vibrancy means people, lots of people, and visitor numbers are dependent on thriving businesses to attract them and convenient and competitive parking options. We should do whatever we can to preserve and enhance that vibrancy, not deter it. Two, parking is an essential service and a valuable revenue stream, of course, but there is a balance between, because people will go elsewhere. You risk losing the revenue for the first hour anyway and beyond, and simultaneously killing the vibrancy of the social hub. Administration suggests that the city subsidises car parking. The administration must realise that parking is to business as public open space is to residents. Parking is a service that the city provides to businesses in return for their rates. Public open space is a service that the city provides to residents in return for their rates. Public open space improves our quality of life. Parking provides a livelihood to the businesses. No parking, no customers, no business. The big difference in financial terms, of course, is that parking pays for itself, whereas public open space does not. If we extend the logic of this rationale of subsidising businesses for parking, we will sell off all our car parks and not replace the bays. We will sell public open land and reserves for infill development because of a perceived higher economic value. Businesses facing some challenges, and I want to thank the staff administration for confirming that they predict that there will be a 20% reduction in customers because of the move to $1 for the first hour. This is massive for businesses, 20% reduction of people coming to the car parks. I don't know many businesses that can survive that loss of traffic coming through a particular means via car. And this is no more prevalent in Leederville, where Frame Court and Avenue car parks service almost exclusively all available parking in that community hub. This is all on top of COVID, online shopping and new centres like Karrinyup and Claremont Quarter that offer free parking. We've seen in Leederville alone, Sayers, Green & Co, Foam, Ria, Varga Girl, Flight Centre, Sweet Lips, Theo & Co, etc., etc., etc. These businesses have all closed in recent years, and this measure, in my view, is sure to add more businesses to that tally. 4, the community has spoken, including residents. The feedback was a resounding no to removing 1 hour parking. You know, that was to 30 minutes, and I see 30 minutes a hell of a lot better than charging for the first minute. It is bewildering for me to go from something that I see as a poor decision to a worse decision in terms of its potential impact on our community hubs. The flat first hour fee for the first minute, there's a concept called the power of free, which my wife, who was Chief Marketing Officer of Red Rooster Australia-wide for like 4 or 5 years, and same with Guzman and Gomez, she alerted me to this concept, which is a neuromarketing and behavioural economic principle known as the power of free, is well understood by marketers, whereas it's proven that even 1 cent fee has a significant difference in purchasing decisions compared to the power of free. And we are giving that up in one fell swoop. Sorry. In summary, other local governments are increasing free parking to attract visitors, not removing it. We risk not delivering, and we're talking about $500,000 only in FY23 that this measure is, according to administration, looking to raise. The amount of what we're trying to raise here is minimal to what I see as something that could have catastrophic, irreversible damage to the vibrancy of our community hubs across the City of Vincent. Small businesses are at risk, and we have 5,000 of them operating in the City of Vincent. We will, if we get this wrong, and I'm right, that we will face the anger of residents and ratepayers who didn't want this, who have warned us about this. The risks are too great for the little perceived benefit. In my view, I propose a very simple solution on the table. Simply just reduce CapEx or defer CapEx by $500,000 out of our $21 million budget so that we can forego this revenue increase instead of just spending $500,000 more. That would plug the budget gap. And in my view, as we'll get to the next amendment, I think CapEx is overstated anyway. I don't think we're going to spend it. I think this is a very eloquent solution to a problem that could have, like I said, dire consequences. Long after we move off from council, all of us as individuals, if there is carnage on the street, and like there is in places like Subiaco, I think it's going to be a heavy cost to bear on all of us. I don't want that stamped on my CV as a councillor or as a professional in my career. I'd hope that some of that logic resonates and that you would accept what I'm proposing here tonight for the sake of our community hubs. Thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Look, I think a lot of this is a policy on the run because it hasn't been researched. The power of free parking has certainly been shown. There's overwhelming support against the removal of the 1 hour free. And, you know, in fairness, people have acknowledged that. But I know, having spoken to business people, that they're really, really worried about this because, you know, I've worked in public service. My livelihood hasn't depended on things like this, and they're concerned. And sometimes we hear about that, you know, there's 83% of people come from other jurisdictions. Well, that's a good thing. That's what keeps the businesses running, and that's what keeps the streets buzzing, and that's what we're looking for. So, you know, the frequency of those visitors in the 1 hour, people you talk to think it'd likely be worse with having the $1. But we have no research to show that. And, you know, I think it's a fallacy to think that the removal of 1 hour free will have little or no effect on visitors using select car parks. I know, and I've got it written down here, the action is opposite to what some other local governments are considering in the light of the fight with the competition, which is largely, you know, big shopping centres that offer free parking. And so that's what, you know, we as councillors, you know, taking businesses' opinions and ratepayers' opinions, that's what they're up against the shopping centres. And they're concerned because they got their money on the line and, you know, they have real consequences. In 2022, the City of Perth introduced free nighttime parking in city bays after 6 p.m, as well as extending 1 hour free parking in select areas of West Perth because they were trying to rejuvenate those areas. And so my concern is just we're doing this with, you know, a hope that it's the right thing, and we're not really sure. There's evidence in Subiaco and other places that, you know, they've gone backwards. But, you know, if you're running a business, you're really concerned about this. So, you know, I firmly believe we should keep the 1 hour, jettison the $1 for 1 hour. I don't think it's really worth the 500 odd K of new revenue with the damage that it could do, which might be hard to turn around. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Councillors, any comments? Councillor Loden.
Just a question on the amendment. So it refers to the $496,000 and the proposal to defer capital expenditure. So where I struggle with this is where that comes from, given the time we've spent, and if there's any suggestions on where that $500,000 of savings should come from, where we would like to see the CEO find that money. And I guess the other concern I have is this sort of deferment of capital expenditure. From my perspective, if we want to avoid spending capital, then we need to be knocking over buildings. We have this audit action that says that we are underspending on our assets and that we've had sitting there for a long time that we need to address. The only way we can address that is by allocating the funds for it. If we don't allocate the funds for it, we're in breach of that audit action. So I'm curious about how you see those two matters interplaying.
Councillors, just in response to that, Councillor Loden, administration has been tasked with finding the savings, but they have listed some projects at the end of their comment. They have, they've obviously said that they don't support it and they've outlined their reasons, but they have talked about Banks Reserve, new public toilets, Litter Stadium floodlights, greening program and William Street uplighting, and that would provide, that's an example. And I think, CEO, could you perhaps answer that question? Was they selected on the basis that they were new rather than renew?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, as some councillors have mentioned, the vast majority of the capital works program is renewal works and moving through a backlog of essential maintenance. When providing a response to the amendment that's being considered, we reviewed the list of, it's only a small number, the list of items in the capital works program which are new, and also those which are potentially, depending on how we go on delivering the capital works program, might be able to be considered at mid-year budget review that could potentially go on because they could be delivered in the second 5 months of the last 5 months of the financial year, depending on when the mid-year budget was adopted. They're indicative only, but we just wanted to provide some guidance where it's not our recommendation not to do them. Our recommendation is to do them, but we just wanted to provide a little bit of guidance on the response about what new items could potentially be delivered or deferred, and may not need to be delivered urgently in the first 6 months of the financial year. But we only provided, that's only a very quick response. We did that just in the last few hours.
Councillor Loden, do you have a question?
And then I guess, so in follow up to that then, because those funds cascade through the 10-year LTFP to $5 million, we would similarly need to be able to take $5 million out of that 10-year plan as well. Is that plausible, practical? Is that possible that we can do that while still being able to do the asset renewal that we need to do?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that revenue does accumulate over that 10 years, and over the course of the LTFP, that would be a significant loss of revenue, and we don't have an answer to council at the moment about what could compensate for that.
So I struggle. I get what you're pushing at here, Councillor Arkolo, but what I struggle with is the overall financial sustainability aspect here. This is the budget where we are basically funding our asset renewal. It's not popular, or it's not a happy thing that we're doing here, that there's going to be lots of lights and things that people are going to see. This is funding the buildings that we haven't been maintaining for, since the inception of the city in many cases, and sometimes before that. And I can't see a plausible way where we can still demonstrate that financial sustainability for the whole of the city's 10-year plan, and do this. If we want to do this, I feel like we need some more tangible and practical examples of where those costs will come from, and not just one-off costs, but ongoing costs. So that needs to remove a a program that we run every year for the next 10 years that's part of that 10-year financial plan. It needs to reduce a headcount that is part of that 10-year financial plan that forecasts forward through there. Or we need to increase the rate in the dollar to compensate for that. I mean, in our budget discussions when we talked about this, this was one mechanism we were using to bring the rate in the dollar down from over 10% to the 7 point, sorry, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, that we currently landed on. So that's the counterbalance that we have to weigh, that we still have to demonstrate not only financial sustainability in this year, but also long-term financial sustainability for the city, that we can't just keep on kicking this down the road because we want it to be, because we want to show these benefits to the community. We need to actually raise the rates that we need to raise and make those tough decisions. And so from my perspective, I don't support the amendment. For me to be able to support something like this, I'd need to see a better understanding of where these cost savings are going to come from this year, but also in the long run as well.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Councillors, a question? Sure.
So one of the things that weren't provided, and you can answer to me to confirm it wasn't in the budget pack, was that to answer Councillor Loden's question is that we would need, if you wanted me to be specific about which assets were to be deferred, that I would actually need a breakdown of all the capital assets by quarter and when they're likely to be delivered in terms of actual spend, quarter by financial year, to see which ones are likely really to slip to subsequent years. And then I would also need the same breakdown of how much of that fund is coming through from municipal funds. Quite frankly, I don't believe, and I looked for it in the budget pack, that information is actually provided. All I do know is that out of the 21 million, 7.5 million has been asked for.
A question?
Is that information available to me to answer Councillor Loden's question?
Would you like to take that question, Director or CEO?
Through Mayor Cole, the information in the budget essentially is a line item for each capital works project, and falling in that financial year. We don't break it down to which month it's provided.
I mean,
through Mayor Cole, if I could just add, it's not broken down by month, but the capital projects are broken down by whether they're municipally funded, grant funded, and so on. So and within the year? Yep.
The crux of what I was saying of the amendment is that I don't think you're going to spend 21 million and you're asking 7.5 million from taxpayers now for something that I don't think will be delivered. But to answer Councillor Loden's question, which was insightful and a good one, I can only be specific about it and if I'm given the information, and therefore it has to come from administration. I'm happy to adjourn this meeting to get that information and get, propose a motion to adjourn if that's to answer his question.
We can't adjourn the meeting because we've already started the new financial year. We have to send out rate notices. We've got deadlines from our printer in order to issue rates notices. I know, I'm just saying that deferral is not an option given that we're already commenced. We sort of pushed the budget as far as we could because we had extra workshops and we've had, a lot of additional information provided, but we can't defer tonight because we have commenced the new financial year. Councillor Warner.
Going back to this amendment, basically, I really feel like, well, personally, I'll speak for myself. I feel like I'm really, between a rock and a hard place here. There's no doubt that we need to raise funds here, but there's no question that for 500K, are we actually, is it worth it? And the potential agony that we can cause. And I'm really quite concerned about that. I'm just going to ask a really simplistic question here, basically, because I think most people agree that if you're using the parking with the first hour free question to one side, if you're using the parking, if you're coming into town and you're parking there for a while, paying for it is not the issue. So is the option here to increase the actual rate of the paid portion of the parking? Can we actually have some sort of funds from that, which is relatively the user pays, and we're not penalising the people who are coming in for the quick trip, but we're and hopefully not disincentivising people for coming in at all, but using our existing facilities to maybe make that difference. In particular, the people who are parking all day are using the facilities where they could be catching the train or whatever, or maybe they are and they're parking all day and we're actually providing that space for them. Maybe we need to be taking a bit more from them.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify what's in the attachment on the fees and charges, this budget is proposing a 20-cent increase to the hourly rate, which you pay from the second hour, and a $1 increase in the all-day parking rate from $18.50 to $19.50. Just checking. So there are already some proposed increases. That's different to what was advertised because the $1 only nets less revenue than what was being proposed by the reduction from 60 minutes to 30 minutes free parking.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand that. I just wonder if that's enough. Should we be actually trying to ramp up that side and ramp down the other side?
Through you, Mayor Cole, this wasn't when we're looking at the parking and the parking proposal, while it's been done and it has to be done through the fees and charges mechanism. There is a budget and revenue aspect to it, but we're not looking at it only from a budget lens, but speaking purely on the financial aspect of it. The largest number of transactions are within that first hour because people might be coming in and moving through. So there is a large volume. The volume is in that first hour and you apply a nominal charge of $1 for that number of transactions. So it does produce a significant amount of revenue by having a very small charge on a large number of transactions. That would result in a much higher hourly rate for the second hour, potentially, if we were trying to move that second hour up to a much higher level. And then that essentially produces the perverse effect of disincentivizing people from staying and wanting to be in our town centres for longer, to go out and to shop for more than an hour. You'd be having people rush in and out and maybe not staying for what we call dwell time in the town centres.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Gontaszewski.
I just wanted to say I do appreciate Councillor Aupolo's passion on this matter. I've had similar concerns about this change, and this is a position that I've arrived at, fairly reluctantly, and I wanted to say why. I just think it's really important that we understand and clarify that when we talk about funds coming in from this particular initiative, it's not new money. It's, at the very least, it's not extra money over and above. It's, as Councillor Aupolo said at the beginning of his speech about the budget, it's essentially we've got to raise a certain amount of money to fund our initiatives, and we have to decide how we're going to do that. And one of the ways we do it is through fees and charges, and the rest needs to be raised through rates. So this is effectively a way to reduce the amount of dollars that we need to raise from rates. And it's looking to put those funds into the bucket of money that fund our operations and capital works. Given that I support the current rate increase, I think that ultimately I don't support an increase in general rates that would fund this. And in terms of cutting or deferring CapEx, I guess it's a question of which CapEx, because I don't support cuts to renewal activities. And then also, as Councillor Loden has alluded to in his comments, which CapEx in subsequent years, which OpEx in subsequent years, because obviously the impact of any proposed amendment at this stage of the budget process goes broader than what's on the page. I wish that we had the capital works program over 4 years, the corporate business plan and the long-term financial plan with us tonight for adoption, because it would have allowed Councillor Aupolo to craft an amendment for consideration that was took into consideration the impact of the change he's proposing. Without that in front of me, I cannot support the amendment. I do note that I don't believe this is a full year implementation. We are looking at undertaking some monitoring of our short-term bays, And we do have an opportunity to consider how we raise the funds for the programs that we want to deliver in our budget next year, including the distribution between fees and charges and rates.
Cole, can I just point of order? Just to clarify, I was actually, Councillor Gonachevsky indicated that I was looking to cut CapEx. I just want to be clear, this is a deferment of CapEx to a subsequent year, so that we're not raising that 500,000 this year. I'm not cutting any CapEx. It's just a deferment. That was all. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Look, just some comments from me. I think that Councillor Loden has highlighted that when you're looking at these things, you also have to look at the compounding impact, and he's already spoken to that and explained that well. So I just want to re-emphasise that point, that we're not just, and I think this is a trap that we've been in previous budget years, where we've gone, well, we'll just cut that because then we'll, keep rates low. And we've done this practice in the past, and that's, we had to do it through COVID. And it's about saying, at what point do you actually say, we can't do that anymore? And the asset sustainability ratio, we're there. Like, it's actually a really huge achievement that the current budget is underscoring the fact that we get to that 0.9% asset sustainability ratio. The other fact point I'd make is that of the capital expenditure program, we've got the carry forwards, which are already allocated, and we've given an undertaking to our community that we've taken that money and we're doing those projects. I don't believe we can cut that. Then we've got the grants funding, and the actual bit that remains is $7 million. So whilst there's a big figure, when you're looking at what remains open to cut, it's roughly $7 million. I feel more comfortable having put these safeguards in place from the previous amendment. So I sort of feel, for me, that sort of addresses some of the concerns. And the other thing that's really important is that we're talking a lot about Leederville. The Leederville car parks are in transition. We have a request for a proposal currently out, and we will be seeking, we'll be getting back concepts that will be addressing our desire to have multi-storey car parking. That's a new opportunity for council, with getting expert advice and all the rest of it, to actually look at the pricing mechanisms. Because a lot of people, even Cam from North Perth, who emailed us just before the meeting tonight, I had an email chat with him, and he was arguing for the, demand pricing or looking at longer stay pricing, and that remains open to council to look at that when we're starting afresh with the multi-storey car park. So I think it is important also to note that Leederville car park transition is happening, and the key benefit of that, which I spoke to a pub owner up in Mount Hawthorn about this, is that is actually going to be really transformational for our local businesses in terms of bringing in population. So this tweak to the parking, the safeguards to monitor that and see what impact that has. But the best thing we can do is actually open up those car parks for redevelopment, bring in multi-storey car parking, bring in new laneway development, provide the additional parkland that Susan Gonchaszewski led the charge on, and create a really fantastic layered town centre with more people there. That is the best shot we've got at improving situation for our local businesses. So that has to be that, for me, is like a completely strategic opportunity that will really deliver for our local businesses. We've already seen the benefit of ABN, and I have met with local businesses to discuss this change and to ask them about the impacts. And yes, we've had COVID again, and Watercorp and ABN having some time at home, but fundamentally having that population, whether it's residential or workers in the town centre, is really the significant change that has the impact on local businesses. Any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Alexander, have you spoken to this amendment? You just got a question?
Yes. Look, you might want to answer this question. We were considering a 4.5% rate rise, and this is compared to what's been suggested by most people here against the 5.5, if you take out the 2.1%. And do you agree that the business people are particularly concerned about this change, and it will affect their livelihoods? And looking at it next April, and that may be well too late for them. And it's not that we're considering no rate rise, because You know, you may agree. that-
Councillor Alexander,
Sorry,
you were the
that's not a
seconder,
question.
and I don't really feel like that's a question. I feel
No,
like
it's
that's
not. No,
more
you're right.
debate. So, but good on you for having a shot. I'm going to move on. Anyone else wish to speak that hasn't already spoken on this amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against?
Sorry.
I just declare
Sorry.
that, declare
I got it
that
wrong.
carried.
I was a bit slow there.
Yeah, you were a bit slow, but what governance manager, what happens in this situation? I think Councillor Alexander, I call it again. Okay. All those in favour of the amendment? Three, we've got Councillor Alexander, Councillor Warner, Councillor Uplow. All those against? Remainder against. The amendment falls. We're back to the substantive. Councillor Uplow, do you wish to move your second amendment? We're back to the substantive now, so we're open for new amendments if you wish to move any further. No, we've dealt with that.
Yes, so we're talking about the blue. Look, I'll keep this quick because obviously the sentiment in the room has already expressed that, you know, do I have a seconder? Sorry.
Seconded by Councillor Alexander.
Thank you. So I'll try and keep it quick because the sentiment is in the room is that this is not going to pass. But I guess for the due diligence of people watching at home and making sure that we've made an informed decision, I'd like to talk to it. So what I'm proposing here is respectfully requesting Council's consideration to an alternate of the 7.6% rate rise as proposed by administration. If in agreement, it could lead to a more equitable and palatable result for ratepayers. The community sentiment was strongly opposed to the size of the 7.6% rate rise, given the current economic climate. We've already discussed all those reasons: inflation, COVID, interest rate hikes, share market collapses affecting superannuation. We could propose, and what I'm doing here is trying to propose the difference between 4.5% rate rise and 7.6% is only 1.1 million. In the context of our entire budget, the City of Vincent, both CapEx and OpEx, it's small, but the difference for a ratepayer between 7.6% and 4.5% is significant. The 4.5% seems justified based on inflationary pressures. It would still be at the upper range of what other metropolitan Perth councils are actually levying this year. I mean, South Perth is at 4.9%, but then you look at Stirling, 3.75%, Belmont, 3.5%, Claremont, 3.5%, Pepe Grove, 2%, Perth, 1% for residential, and Nedland staff administration proposed 2.5%, but council rejected it for a 0% increase. So even a 4.5% is at, you know, what I would call the upper range, but still justified based on inflationary pressures. We all support underground power. We've spoken about the perceived inequity about the 2.1%. I think we've covered that, so I won't cover it again. The real point here, and really speaking to Councillor Hallett's question about why so late, you know, we've gone through a budgetary process, but there was critical information in his budget pack and subsequent questions that only came to light, and that is this. And we have to make informed decisions on all the information right to this moment. So it is a relevant consideration that we can keep our minds open. The FY23 capital expenditure budget, which we spoke about, just over 20, it's 20.48 million. I'll call it 20 million. I've shown the proof that it's very high and unrealistic based on historical reasons, twice over the highest we've ever done. But what's really important about this is that we have already funded about 13 million of this, which is far in excess of our biggest spend, actual spend in the last 9 years. What we're asking in this budget, which is the new information that came to light, that 7.5 million of this $21 million huge CapEx budget is what we're asking now ratepayers through municipal funds to fund in its rates and through this 7.6 million. So this is what I have an issue with really about the 7.6. I mean, I do have an issue with the 21 million, but all I'm trying to say is what we're effectively doing with this rate rise and with the CapEx budget is asking them to fund right now, in addition to what they've paid in the past, the full $21 million of this CapEx budget, when I know you're not going to spend it. I mean, I'm 99% confident that you are not going to spend this money. And what you are doing effectively is asking for $7 million that we just know we're not going to spend. And it's not stopping. If you believe that we can still do over 13.5, we've already got the money. That's the issue. Now, I'm not asking for any cuts in capital expenditure. I'm asking for a deferment of things that we know we will not spend in this financial year. And I'm not asking for a reduction to the 13 million, which we already have. I'm asking for a reduction and respectfully asking council to consider a reduction of 1.1 million, which is the difference between 7.6 and 4.5. Reduction of 1.1 million to defer CapEx out of the 7 million that we are asking for out of municipal funds to be funded through rates. I'm asking for a 1.1% deferment.
I can see you've gone
That's
over your 5 minutes
Oh, is
and
it?
yeah, so we might
Could I-
move to the seconder.
I thought we got an extra 60 seconds, but okay.
Oh, I think that's passed because the clock has completely left the, so yes, you got your extra time. Well, look, a lot of what's been said has been previously dealt with. We're trying to be fair tonight. So Councillor Below has had, did anyone keep track? 5 minutes only. Did you get 60 seconds additional? No, you can have 60 seconds additional. Can we just get a clock up though? Because it's like trying to monitor this is becoming tricky. Oh, it's run out of battery. Right, okay. Councillor Plow, 60 seconds extra time.
So basically, I'm not suggesting any capital projects that any of these are not necessary. I'm not asking that they be scrapped. I'm asking that they be deferred, only 1.1 million of the 21. And I'm asking that I am concerned about the 7 million that we're asking now, but I'm actually saying only 1.1, and that gets us to a really palatable 4.5% instead of a 7.6. And in this economic environment, I think that, given that we won't spend it, I think that is a reasonable request. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Apollo. Councillor Alexander.
Look, I don't think this is the time to be building reserves. There's a perfect storm, and we've spoken about what that is. Life's hard for some of our vulnerable people, and I just think sometimes, having an open mind and just looking at the particular year we're in, we need to do things a little bit differently, learn some lessons, and better manage the budget. And as Councillor Iopolo has mentioned, we have funds doing very little, just sitting there, yet we're asking for this 7.6 when we can take the 2.1 by just deferring some small CapEx and take that out of the equation, because I for one don't think it's equitable for people who are not getting underground power, already got it, to be paying that. And I don't buy all the explanations about how they're getting value, because I don't think they are. So we have funds doing very, very little. The cap expenditure, and Ross has done the charts, which are pretty interesting, which show, for example, that in 2023, we're recommending $21 million of CapEx, when in the best year, 2017, we've actually spent 9.5 million. And this particular year we're going into, the pandemic, building supplies are hard to get. We have, staffing hard to get. We're not going to do $21 million. And I know some of that runs over a few years, but I'm just appealing to councillors, and we're representing ratepayers, that basically we can handle the 2.1 by deferral. That's easy enough. We're suggesting a 4.5% rate rise. Last year's was 2.64. So that's a substantial rate rise, 4.51. We think 5.5 plus 2.1 to 7.6 is too much. On the front of the voice they're saying that, it's 7.6 and all the rest of it. I respect the fact that councillors say this is the money we need. And that's fair enough. I understand those arguments. But this is an exceptional year. People are hurting and we're representing ratepayers. And I think a 4.5% increase helps administration do their job, take some of the steam out of the inflation, the CPI. And I think it goes somewhat to keeping the spend up reasonably. And the City of Vincent's operating expenditure has gone up from 2016 to 23, from 53 million to 68. That's over 2 million per year. So we could look at actually reducing some of that. And I think, it's incumbent to do, because 2 million a year, if you're running a business, imagine if your expenses went up 2 million a year, and the ratepayers are paying for that. So I just appeal to people to actually consider their ratepayers. 4.5 is significant, and we can handle the 2.1 inside a deferral, and then that's going to be more equitable to a range of people who are not going to be getting underground power. And for those that are, I'm sure they're prepared to pay. Thanks.
Councillors, Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Look, I don't think there's too much disagreement around the table in relation to the fact that we have an issue with CapEx expenditure. We know we need to spend more on CapEx, and so does the OAG. Through this process and in every budget year since I've been on council, we have repeatedly questioned administration and been assured of the capacity to deliver the program. Okay, that has occurred this year as well. However, what we have also done in recent years is we've improved our procurement and contract management and project management capability, which doesn't necessarily bear fruit in the immediacy, but should assist us in delivering more works in a given year. However, even if we don't think we can do works in a particular year, we still need to save for the works we have to do in the future. So I can't support an amendment that doesn't consider that. I appreciate that we're not talking about cancellation, we're talking about deferral. But if you have a roof that's at the point in its life where it needs to be replaced, if you choose not to do it this year, it still needs to be done next year. And then next year, the floorboards are also going to fall due. So if you like to keep your house in order, you have the choice of doing the roof and the floorboard in separate years, or you have the option of doing them in 1 year, but they still need to be done. If you do them in 1 year, you might want to start saving now because it's a big bill that's going to come your way. Councillor Iapolo's amendment talks to reducing rates and deferring works to the next year or the year after, but it doesn't start to save for what we know is coming. And I think, look, I do appreciate that we're in exceptional times, but I also think we have to consider that the exceptional nature of the COVID pandemic has also transitioned into new normal. And that unfortunately, I think that we are in, we need to manage the financial circumstances that we find ourselves in. And look, as we've literally had a roof cave in since I've been on Vincent Council, and when I think about representing ratepayers, I can't do them the disservice of not keeping our house in order any longer. And that means I have to do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing. And it means that I have to be satisfied that we're saving for the works that we need to do. I think that we have a more mature approach to our budget now, so that if we see in mid-year financial review that we're not doing works, we're going to need to make better use of our reserves. We do have to build reserves, and we have to be more financially mature in the way that we use them. I think that's coming. I think that's been demonstrated this financial year, and I think that's how we have to do it in the future. But if we're not doing it, we need to save for it. And I think that this amendment is doesn't cover that. So I'm not supportive of this amendment.
Councillors, Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions of admin through you, just related to this. I guess, we do ask it every year, but I just wanted to provide an opportunity for admin to make a comment on why this year will in fact be different in terms of budget versus actual expenditure. And there's a bit of a double-barreled question whether just what admin's views are on embarking on what's going to be the second largest CapEx expenditure in a financial year over the last 8 or 9 years, or however long Ross's or Councillor Oppie's chart goes back. I guess the responsibility of doing that in a year where we're experiencing, really high inflationary pressure on the materials and labour that this budget is going to be spent on, and whether, in light of that, I guess I think there is somewhat of a view that those inflationary pressures could be transitory. and a deferral would allow us to push those back to a period where, we could get better value for our money when we're trying to deliver $20 million worth of CapEx.
Through Mayor Cole, some general comments in terms of the capital works program going forward and what's being proposed for this year. I think the first answer is that we've done more planning. We have got a much better idea about what is essential and what's required across our different asset classes. So we're more prepared to start delivering this program because we've spent the last few years figuring out exactly what needs to go into it this year and then over the next 3 years as well. We have a highly functioning procurement process and team now. That's depending on the outcome of tonight's discussion by council. The finance team will instruct the procurement team to start cranking up for the tendering process and the contracting process for a lot of this work. And we are much better prepared to start that very soon. And for the bigger projects, we have done the planning around that. We've got a much better defined project management framework. And where previously we ran into trouble with how to go about the community consultation process for some of these projects, that is now much more clearly defined for all officers. They know exactly what's required in terms of consulting or engaging or informing residents about when capital works will begin. And we've been improving the system, and it's getting more efficient about making sure we're getting out to residents who may be impacted by capital works coming forward, and making sure that consultation process is done effectively and meaningfully, but it doesn't result then in long delays in delivering some of these projects, because we now have the sophistication and ability to do that consultation effectively and then undertake the projects with any feedback we may have received from residents or the community in that time.
So through you, Mayor Cole, if I can add something as well. I think what's missing from that, I mean, I'm not saying this is incorrect. What's missing from this is the amount of money. I mean, they are carry forwards, but the amount of money that's actually committed. In other words, a purchase order is placed. There's millions of dollars of money. It's not shown on there as a spend because it hasn't left the account, but it is committed. So there are vehicles ordered, there are play areas ordered. I mean, you look at the carry forwards, there's projects underway, Menzies, Hyde Park toilets, the money's all committed. So what's missing, you're not looking at the full picture, the money that's committed. And we can't place that purchase order without an approved project and a budget. So you have to remember that. The other thing is there's a bundle there in procurement, and it can take some time, procurement. So, if you looked at the full picture, it would look much healthier than that. What you're looking at is actual spend, it's actual dollars that left the account. In that sense, I understand the amendment and etc. But the way we work is we approve a budget, we approve a project, approve a budget, and then there's a process to procure and commit the money. So if you looked at the full picture, you'd find it was quite different. In terms of delivery, the project isn't finished, but the project is, well on its way to delivery, etc. And that's missing from this discussion in that graph.
Sorry, just one follow-up question. I guess we've done a bunch of benchmarking against other local governments. Is this practice consistent with other local governments as well? Like if we interrogated their capital expenditure programs, it would look similar to this?
Yes, through my call. I looked earlier at the City of Stirling's budget, which goes tonight, and you'll see a similar size carry forward. And it's because they're multi-year projects. Like I say, you approve a project, you approve a budget, there's a procurement phase, etc. So you have to look at them as it's hard to pack them into an annual year. It just doesn't work that way in practical terms. So if you look at other councils, you'll see similar carry forward, similar levels of spend against the budget. It's not unusual. I worked for 3 in WA, and it's pretty normal in that respect.
Look, I'll just briefly speak to it. I think there's a few things I mentioned previously when talking to the substantive, that if you look at rate increases over the last 3 years, because we've been in unprecedented times for this is our 3rd year where we've had extremely unique circumstances. And we've, and I mentioned that over the 3-year period, this is averaging a 2.53% increase for commercial and a 3.3% rate increase for residents. I think it has to be looked at in the context of those previous 2 years. If we don't fund the CapEx to this degree, we don't meet the audit finding to reach the asset sustainability ratio of 0.9, which we were just hitting. And that is a major achievement of this budget. Western Power Underground Power Project, we have moved from 3 to 8 projects. The vast majority of Vincent residents will benefit directly from being able to use the rolling cash fund. Highgate East being the exception, but the CEO has gone to some lengths to try to explain the bigger picture benefits. And look, rating and taxation, if you haven't been to hospital this year, you still pay for it. You know, like it's just the society that we live in. We don't have a user pay system. We are government. On some things we do, but not everything. In terms of building reserves, our reserves are only net positive by $405,000. It's positive because that is the first time we've achieved that in some time, and that's a good thing, but it's nowhere near where it should be when you look at how we benchmark against other local governments in terms of our reserves. So just coming back to these key issues that, you know, we've been on this journey to meet that asset sustainability ratio. We were interrupted by COVID. We've got to get back on track. The Director of Business has outlined what that actually means in terms of the fact that we are a low rating council. So you can't compare us to other councils that are rating high, because their 4.5% might actually be the same dollar amount to their residents because we're a low rating council. So without retreading old ground, I just thought I'd raise those few key points. So appreciate the effort that you've gone to, Councillor Opolo, but we have been on this pathway, interrupted by COVID. We need to do this. Any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Loden.
One comment on the deferment of capital, and I get what you're trying to do there with bringing the rate rise down this year, but effectively what that does is that just pushes it to next year. So I think in our LTFP, we assume a 2.5% rate rise next year by reducing from 7.2 to 4.5. That 2.7% rate rise basically gets jumped on the top of next year's what we're assuming is our rate rise to balance the budget. And then that becomes 5.2% rate rise. So if we're not willing to do more than a 4.5% rate rise this year, how are we going to do a 5.2% rate rise the following year when we've just done this rate rise here? My concern overall, again, he comes back to this, although we are high compared to everybody else, overall as a council, we rate low compared to those other councils. And the reason why is because we've done what is popular, which is keeping rates low rather than what we should have been doing, which is rating how much we need to maintain our assets, deliver on the community's expectations, and see that we are properly funding all the aspects of what we do. Thank you.
Okay, anyone who hasn't spoken wish to address the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Councillor Opolo and Councillor Alexander voting in favour. All those against? Declare the amendment lost. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further amendments coming forward? Does the mover wish to close debate?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Virginia and Reece and the finance team. A legacy of underspend in our ICT infrastructure here at Vincent means that many of the budget processes are manual, they're laborious, they're hideous, and I just want to say thank you very much for your work. This is something also that we need to address and are working to address to ensure that we have efficient business systems at Vincent, but you've done a fantastic job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. Sorry, Councillor Gontaszewski. Okay, that has closed debate. So I'll put the budget. This is now back to substantive, and the motion is to adopt the item. Just make sure I get this right. Too many pieces of paper. Item 11.1, adoption of the annual budget 22-23. It is an absolute majority decision, and it is as amended. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Iapolo and Councillor Alexander voting against the budget. I declare the budget adopted. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to the finance team, working through COVID, working through many challenging circumstances this year, and really appreciate all of the efforts that you've gone to. If you could pass that on to Renelle and others in the finance team too. Thank you. Well, that concludes business for this evening. So on that note, I'll thank you, members of the public gallery. I can't believe you're still here. Thank you for sitting through that with us. We appreciate your company this evening and your comments. And thank you to anyone who's joined us online, and declare the meeting closed at 9:14 p.m.
Night, folks. Go and see if my children are asleep.